Chapter 1137. The ones that swooped down were strange wyverns. In terms of size, form, and attack methods, they were similar to the marsh wyverns or wild poison dragons. They also had robust bodies that were more than 5 meters long and were covered in fine gray scales. They had powerful wings that were covered in scales, thick and sturdy hind limbs, sharp claws, and sharp teeth that were covered in sticky saliva. Apart from that, their claws, sharp teeth, and the spindle-shaped bony tails that they dragged behind them had black smoke curling around them. They looked like they were filled with poison. When such powerful beasts swooped down from the sky, their terrifying impact and biting ability could easily defeat the native armies of any plane of existence. On top of that, they had a body full of poison. Even if it was an ordinary powerhouse, a small cut from them would result in a terrifying blood poison. It was a pity that they had not chosen the right enemy for themselves today. Facing the group of wyverns that swooped down, Mangus and his sister let out a low, crisp laugh. They actually took the form of a two-headed magus, and with elemental magic in one hand and spiritual force in the other, they charged into the group. The violent magic wreaked havoc, and the wyverns screeched mournfully from the explosions, flesh and blood flying everywhere. When Chiolish's spiritual force blast rippled across the horizon, the wyverns dizzily fell from the sky. For a moment, the whole group of wyverns was in chaos. Through the AI chip, Grim could clearly sense that these strange wyverns were at most rank 2 creatures. The foreign powerhouse was not much better than them, and the energy aura on his body was only at rank 3. Even if he could slightly increase his attack and defense after fusing with the wyvern beneath him, it was still too arrogant to think that he could threaten and attack a few rank 4 magi. Even Mangus and his sister, who were publicly acknowledged as weaklings in the group, could rampage through the group of wyverns the moment they showed their might. Slaughtering the wyverns was as easy as chopping vegetables. Seeing his prey so arrogant, the foreign powerhouse that had fused with a rank 3 wyvern roared and charged down from the sky. But he was only halfway there when Mangel's violent and ferocious elemental sorcery split open his flesh. And when it forced itself to rush to the side of the figure, it was controlled by Chiolish's little spiritual illusion spell and ran around in circles, chasing the figure all over the sky. Just as Mangles and his sister were casually toying with each other as if they were walking dogs, in the sky not far away, a huge crevice resembling the sunset glow flew out, and flocks of powerful flying magical beasts with black scales and red wings flew out. On the back of the magical beast, there were a few fellows who looked similar to the former sitting on its back. As soon as they appeared, their gazes could not help but fall on this strange battlefield. A few of their leaders immediately became furious and flew over with a group of subordinate. Grim swept his gaze over the newcomer and quickly made a simple assessment of his opponent's basic strength. Most of them were at the 2nd and 3rd step, while the leader was a 4th step powerhouse. His strange energy undulations could be sensed from afar. "Damned magi, how dare you slaughter our Daima? I'll kill you all here today." It was unknown if these foreign experts were too arrogant or if they had lost their minds. It was clear that Grimm's side had the upper hand in terms of overall strength, but they still charged forward like a bunch of wild boars. Grimm frowned slightly. To be honest, he did not want to fight this battle today. First, this was purely a meaningless battle. Even if he killed all these arrogant fellows, it would be difficult to obtain any meaningful spoils of war. To be honest, in the eyes of the Magi, these foreign powerhouses were no different from a group of brainless monsters and beasts. They were not worthy of the great title of an intelligent race. Second, the Morian plane was now in chaos. Strange creatures and foreign powerhouses from various regions and factions had appeared in the plane. If they were too ostentatious at this time, it would easily attract the attention of those true powerhouses. Once they were targeted by those fellows, Grim and his 2 companions' return journey would be fraught with misfortune. If they were not careful, they might even lose their lives. Therefore, looking at the ferocious group of dragons that swooped down, Grimm's eyes turned cold. He snorted lightly, and a dark red elemental barrier shot out from his body. In an instant, it covered an area of 1,000 meters. Burning domain. As a fire wizard, Grimm had mastered elemental techniques since he was a Grade 1 fire wizard. The initial high-temperature barrier had evolved into a flame barrier, and then into the current burning domain. The power of his attacks had also increased rapidly. Within the burning domain, there was almost no difference in strength. Any enemy that stepped into the domain would be directly burned by the elemental flames, and the elemental damage would be as high as 200 degrees per second. 200 degrees per second. This level of elemental damage was only enough to warm up a Type 4 powerhouse. That was why Grimm rarely used his burning domain in high-level battles. Rather than maintaining the burning domain, it would be more worthwhile to release a blazing fireball with its attack power. However, when faced with a large number of low-level magical creatures, the burning domain instantly changed the situation of the entire battlefield. Everything within the range of the light red elemental barrier began to burn. The earth was burning, the rocks were burning, the soil was burning, and even the air was starting to burn. The group of wyverns was wrapped in the scarlet flames, and crackling sounds could be heard as they burned. No matter how they flapped their wings and flew low, they could not break free from the elemental flames. Although these strange wyverns had a certain degree of magic resistance, their scales and bodies were as thin as a piece of paper when faced with a powerful fire wizard who had mastered 4 types of law of fire. All the wyverns within the burning domain flew around like blind people, frantically trying to escape. Many wyverns fell from the sky as their companions crashed into them or tore them apart. The wyverns at the edge of the burning domain could still rely on their strong bodies to struggle and escape. Even if they managed to escape, their bodies were covered in blisters of various sizes, as well as terrifying burn marks. The remaining wyverns roared and crashed into the burning domain a dozen times before turning into blazing fireballs and plummeting to the ground. Puft, puft, puft. Like dumplings, the strange wyverns with their wings burned through and their bodies charred fell from the sky, smashing craters into the ground. They could only let out mournful cries as they shrieked, unable to break free from the elemental flames that surrounded them. In the end, their heads drooped lifelessly, turning into piles of charred corpses amidst the blazing flames. The wyverns that had been swooping in from the distance suddenly stopped their charge. As the scene before them was too horrifying, and they had stopped too abruptly, many of the wyvern knights were forced to fly around to avoid their companions who had stopped abruptly. For a moment, the order of the wyverns in the sky fell into chaos. The Tier 4 wyvern knight in the lead stopped in front of the burning domain, his gaze fixed on Grimm through the elemental light barrier. Grimm had already transformed into a humanoid flame. His body did not expand, maintaining his 2-meter-tall height. The eye of blazing flames' blazing gaze also focused on the Tier 4 foreign powerhouse from afar. When their gazes met, sparks flew from their clash. This was the might of a rank 4 magus. Their every action, even if it was just an indifferent gaze, could cause subtle changes in the magical elements between heaven and earth, creating a strange magical effect. The rank 4 wyvern knight only exchanged a few glances with Grimm before he was forced to avert his gaze. Only then did he suppress the rising heat in his body. A powerhouse from the magus world. His group would not be able to fight him head-on. The rank 4 wyvern knight instantly understood the difference in strength between them and extinguished his arrogant thoughts of charging forward to take advantage of Grimm. It's a misunderstanding, a misunderstanding. Looks like this was all a misunderstanding. Chapter 1138. The sky was gloomy. There were no clouds in the dark red and gloomy sky, but it was covered with terrible cracks. The cracks were big and small. The small ones were only a few meters long, and they were slowly cruising in the sky. The big ones were thousands of meters long, and they stretched across the sky as if the sky had been torn by a terrible wound, and it was bloody. Gusts of void hurricanes blew in from the cracks, causing serious and irreversible damage to the surrounding plane's ecology. Under the cracks, all life was destroyed, and the material of the plane suffered a terrible looting. The once lush green plants that covered every inch of land had disappeared without a trace, blown into pieces by the void hurricanes, and then swept to the end of the sky. Those animals and beasts with high vigilance had fled, avoiding the area where the void hurricanes raged. After the green plants disappeared, the remaining soil was also swept to other places by the hurricane, causing the entire land, mountains, and hills to be bare, directly revealing the rock stratum underground. However, whenever the void hurricanes raged, the invisible and intangible energy tides swept over the rock matrix, and sparks of energy could be seen splashing constantly. Layer after layer of the rock matrix was visibly shaved off by the raging void hurricanes. The fallen material was shaken, ground, eroded by the terrible energy, and finally turned into some tiny matter that was invisible to the naked eye, scattered to all corners of the plane. Such scenes weren't unique in the entire Moirian plane, but could be seen everywhere. But overall, the core areas of the Arcane Kingdom were more densely distributed and numerous, and the peripheral areas were only slightly better. Grimm was sure that the origin of the Moirian plane had been severely damaged. Otherwise, under the guidance of the power of the plane's laws, the plane's origin would instinctively repair and heal the cracks on the plane barrier, and it would not allow the void hurricanes outside to erode its body. As for who had damaged the plane's origin, it was no longer important. It could be the Lords of Disaster, or a powerful star beast, or more likely to be the joint attack of the major forces. However, to be able to do it so quickly and thoroughly that the plane's origin lost control of the world in an instant, Grimm deeply suspected that it was the Arcanists who wanted to abandon the ship and escape. Although the Moirian plane was their origin plane, it was equivalent to the mother and homeland of the Arcanists. Under normal circumstances, it was impossible for them to do such a disgusting thing to their origin grounds. But considering that the enemy was pressing on, the Moirian plane could no longer be saved. Before escaping, he would empty the plane's source and not leave any spoils of war for the enemy. Although destroying the source plane was not the same as wiping out the sorcerers, without this source, all the sorcerers would become scattered sand. There would no longer be a core that could unite them. At that time, without the replenishment of new sorcerers, the older generation of sorcerers could only wander in other planes as slave owners or conquerors. After another few thousand years, the source of the sorcerers would be cut off, and the old sorcerers would be assimilated into the local natives of the other planes. At that time, the sorcerers as a group would quietly disperse in the vast and boundless starry world. After Grimm and the others withdrew from the Thousand Flowers Plain, they went all the way east. After passing through the Corleone Mountains, they turned north. Their goal was the first evacuation point that they had set in advance, the Emerald Hills. It was also an extremely famous scenic area in the Moirian Plain. Along the way, they tried their best to avoid densely populated areas or areas with many spatial rifts. To be honest, they had gained enough from this trip, and they did not want to encounter those foreign creatures again. Unfortunately, as the world was collapsing and the laws of the plane were in chaos, the suppression of the Moirian plane on foreign invaders was getting weaker and weaker. Hence, there were more and more foreign creatures that took the opportunity to barge in. It was inevitable that there would be some ignorant fellows among them. Along the way they fought. If not for the unprecedented strength of Grimm and the others, and their tacit cooperation, this return trip would have been more difficult and dangerous than the previous mission. Along the way, the three of them were in sorrow, pain, and even some indescribable depression. At first, Grimm was a little puzzled by these inexplicable emotions, until he was reminded by the AI chip. These emotions were not their own, but were projected and infected by the consciousness of the dying plane into their souls. As they were enveloped by the consciousness of the Moirian plane, this infection was invisible and could not be detected at all. The consciousness of the Moirian plane, did not want to die either. It had its own fear and unwillingness. Therefore, as it walked step by step towards death, it was also frantically struggling and crying for help, projecting the madness of death and the despair of waiting for death into the depths of the consciousness of every living being. It was sinking, it was in despair, and it was dragging all living beings with it, sinking into despair together. All the living beings of the plane who still had a breath of life rushed out of their nests and shelters like crazy, attacking every invader in a frenzy, not caring about the huge gap in strength between them. This also accelerated the process of the disappearance of the plane's consciousness. Since the day of the collapse, the systematic arcane power in the Morian plane had been rapidly disappearing. A large number of arcanists disappeared from the Morian plane, and no one knew where they went, but they left behind even more low-ranked arcanists and helpless arcane apprentices. As a result, a large number of refugees gathered in the areas where the arcane towers were still lit up. The remaining arcanists were squeezed in a small living area, relying on the little arcana energy they had left to resist the horrible foreign creatures and the harsh living environment. The weak people died because of the energy radiation, the lack of food, and the fighting and killing between each other. Inside the small shelters, scenes of madness, darkness, and desperation were playing out one after another. And the actors were all in character, vividly portraying the despair and madness of human nature in the process of waiting for death. It was depressing and made people sigh. With the strong elemental resistance of a Tier 4 wizard, Grimm and the other two were almost indifferent to the slight changes in the environment of the plane. But along the way, the small villages they passed through were already empty, and not a single survivor could be found. On the contrary, in some wilderness, they found the remains of some recently dead humans. They were all skinny and had empty stomachs. Obviously, they had to leave the shelter to look for food because of extreme hunger, so they died in the energy rays of the shocking radiation outside. In less than half a month, the entire Morian plane had fallen into a state of dying, and even the consciousness of the plane and every living being in it had only their last breath left. Chapter 1139. Emerald Hills. It used to be a beautiful place in the Morian plain with a fascinating scenery. The soil here was rich in strange mineral particles, which would show a variety of beautiful colors, such as green or blue, under the illumination of the sky. And under the elegant and quiet moonlight, the colors would constantly change, like pieces of emerald gems flowing gently with the moonlight. Therefore, this place got the reputation of Emerald Hills. But at this moment, the beauty of the past had disappeared, and Emerald Hills had now become a bare hill. The top of the bony hill lacked the cover of soil and vegetation, revealing the hard and cold rock base. Under the illumination of the moonlight, it seemed especially cold and merciless. And at the top of the hill, a small campfire was burning, and 7 strange figures in black robes were sitting together, as if waiting for something. It had been 13 days since the day of destruction, and the entire Morian plain had become more and more restless. The frequency of the appearance of various foreign creatures had also become more and more frequent. In such an environment, it was very difficult to find a quiet place where no one would disturb them. Moreover, with the destruction of the plane world, there had been a large area of damage and disintegration of the plane barrier. On the continent, because many areas were close to the breach of the plane barrier, hundreds and thousands of tons of plane matter were swept away by the void hurricane and scattered into the depths of the endless sea of stars. Moreover, this kind of loss was still happening. As long as the plane's breach was not plugged, the substance of the plane would continue to flow away until only the strongest and most resilient core essence was left in the entire plane. And those creatures that were swept into the depths of the sea of stars had no chance of surviving. "Captain Roy, how long do you think we need to wait?" A black-robed sorcerer raised his head and asked softly, his tone full of dissatisfaction. As she spoke, the hood of the black robe slid down a little, revealing a small part of her delicate white chin. A small black mole at the corner of her mouth added a strange charm to her. Yes, Captain Roy, maybe the members of that team have died in battle, otherwise they would have arrived by now. Another black-robed sorcerer also complained with dissatisfaction. There's nothing to complain about. The leader of the group was a black-robed magus with a golden ring on his head. There was a deep claw mark on his left cheek, and there was a gray aura lingering around it. It seemed like there was still some foreign energy that had not been completely removed. He looked exceptionally cold and ferocious. Before we parted ways, we agreed to wait here for 3 days. Only 2 days have passed, and we'll be able to return in 1 day. What's the rush? That's what you say, but this plane. The black-robed female magus's voice was low and sexy, but her words were full of worry. During these few days of rest, I can already hear the continuous explosions coming from the heavens. This means that the barrier of the Morian plane will not be able to hold for long. Once the barrier is broken, the ultra-long-distance interplanar teleportation portal we are carrying may be affected by the nether storm. At that time, although she didn't say anything else, her unfinished words had already brought endless thoughts to the other sorcerers. As Tier 4 elites selected by the Wizard faction, Team 1 and 2 successfully completed their mission and returned to the evacuation point. Unfortunately, out of the 12 people who set out, only 7 were left when they returned. This also meant that in the 53-day journey, 5 elite Tier 4 sorcerers had died in the Morian plane. The death rate was nearly half, which showed how dangerous and terrifying the mission they were carrying out was. As for the third team, which was the main force, there were only 4 members, and they were all miscellaneous or newly advanced sorcerers selected by the major organizations. With their strength and adaptability, the probability of surviving such a dangerous mission was still quite low. Therefore, after the sorcerers of the 2 elite teams met here, they waited silently while secretly guessing the number of people who might return from the third team. The weak 2-headed sorcerer was bound to fall, and the arcane sorcerer with the rank of puppet master had a high probability of falling as well. After all, such a guy was only good at fighting, but not good at escaping. Once surrounded by powerful enemies, the chance of escape was almost zero. The slightly famous fire sorcerer was strong, but in such a dangerous plane battlefield, the more eye-catching one's strength was, the faster one would die. Therefore, the chances of him completing the mission and escaping from danger were not high. On the other hand, the Dark Sorcerer had the strength of a Tier 4 intermediate sorcerer, and her sorcery was inclined towards mobility and sneak attacks. Therefore, this kind of guy was the most suitable for the plane battlefield, as he could advance and retreat, fight and escape. Once he survived this plane battlefield, his strength would also increase by a lot. However, just as the sorcerers were waiting silently, 3 tall and strange figures appeared on the rugged road in the distance, quickly approaching the campsite. The sorcerers around the campfire raised their vigilance, and under their black robes, there was a constant rustling sound. Some instant-cast magic wands, sorcery scrolls, powerful sorcery weapons, and strange secret treasures slid into the palms of their hands, ready to be used. The black-robed sorcerer stood up and glanced around, and could not help but let out a soft cry of surprise. The sharp and tender roots gently pierced into the rock formation like a dagger and quickly spread and grew inside. In less than a quarter of an hour, the whole magic plant expanded and grew into a magic forest that covered an area of an acre. Strange and mysterious witchcraft runes were faintly flowing on the green veins that covered the surface of the rock foundation. It used its own dense root system to form a huge witchcraft rune circle buried deep in the ground. Wizard Roy stood in the center of the huge witchcraft rune circle. Violent and ferocious witchcraft energy was emitted from his body and continuously injected into the magic plant system under his feet. Dense rune lines and energy threads appeared out of thin air. The energy contained inside became denser and denser, even to the point where it was dazzling. "Come in, the teleportation is about to begin." After hearing Wizard Roy's command, the remaining 9 wizards did not hesitate to step on the roots and leaves of the magic plant. They each found a place to close their eyes and wait. After this period of getting used to and interacting with each other, Grimm and the other 2 wizards had become familiar with each other, so they stood closer to each other. Mangus, in particular, even took the initiative to stand next to Grimm, as if he was being protected by his wings. Grimm knew he was weak, and he might not be able to handle such a violent, long-distance teleportation, so he did not pay much attention to him. The bright and dazzling rune-light circle had already spread into a strange sea of light, enveloping the bodies of the 10 wizards. Then, it began to tear open a dimensional tunnel that led to somewhere in the outer realm. Due to the damage of the Morian plane, the dying plane's consciousness could no longer suppress this kind of dimensional teleportation that could tear open space. Therefore, the difficulty of breaking open space was much easier than the last time they sneaked in. However, when a huge black hole was torn open in the space, an energy storm surged out and lingered around all the wizards, madly washing their bodies. At this time, it was not a good idea to put up an elemental shield. It would cause the energy in the space to become chaotic, which would lead to unpredictable and terrifying consequences. Therefore, all the wizards could only close their eyes and endure bitterly, relying on their tempered bodies and their own magic resistance to resist the invasion and sweeping of the space energy. Everyone felt their body was strangely elongating, twisting, and changing shape. They gradually lost their sense and judgment of the plane space. Even though the wizards had made countless improvements to the interplane ultra-long-distance teleportation circle, it was still difficult to reduce the danger of the teleportation process. Only high-ranked magi who had undergone multiple modifications could withstand such terrifying spatial fluctuations. Chapter 1141. It was Medusa. She was the first Witch of Destiny who had been fighting with Alice all this time. How did she do it? Grimm was furious, but he could do nothing about it. He had fallen into the biggest crisis of his life. The timing of the enemy's attack was perfect. It was the most crucial moment of the super long-distance teleportation. Grimm's vision turned red, and he could vaguely hear the angry roar of the Golden Hoop Roy. His body was hit by both the violent blood energy and the power of space. It was as if he had fallen into an invisible energy storm. His ears were filled with the rumbling of the wind, and the protective force field outside his body was smashed to pieces in an instant. Before he could spit out a mouthful of blood, it was pushed back by the violent energy. Grimm could not care less about the turbulence of the teleportation. His body instantly transformed into an energy form, turning into a terrifying flame giant surrounded by violent elemental flames. Facing the overwhelming energy wave, Grimm knew that he could not escape unscathed. He immediately put the most important storage rings on his body into the core of the law. Only then did he summon the violent flame energy to meet the energy wave. A newly advanced rank 4 Magus self-destructed with all his might. Even if he was weak when he was alive, it was still deadly. The two violent energies collided, squeezed, and annihilated each other in a small area. The energy ripples that couldn't be vented repeatedly washed over Grimm's flaming body, causing the 5-meter-tall flaming giant to shrink and explode again. Grimm endured this extreme test and roared with his life on the line. He extracted a large amount of pure flame energy from the core of the law and condensed it into layers of flame protection on the surface of his body. Every time a layer exploded, a new one would be formed. He relied on his powerful and profound witchcraft to resist the impact and erosion of the energy wave. It was obvious that the great witch Medusa had made up her mind to blast Grimm out of the teleportation space. If that happened, Grimm would either be torn to pieces by the spatial storm or sent to an unknown area by the chaotic spatial energy. Either way, it was not good news for Grimm. That was why Grimm vowed to resist with his life. Even if he had to endure an unimaginable amount of energy, he would not take a step back. He did not believe that the Great Witch Mesa would dare to kill him at the risk of having the entire elite team of sorcerers buried with her. Therefore, he was persevering, he was enduring until the teleportation was completed, and then being blasted out of the teleportation array was worth it. About 10 seconds later, there was a flicker of light in front of him. He seemed to have arrived at his destination. At this moment, the unvented energy tide seemed to have been drawn away by another powerful force. Grim relaxed and fell to the ground, panting heavily without a care for his image. At this moment, he had already retreated from his flame giant form. His entire body was filled with traces of energy wreaking havoc. Even his spirit had shrunk to an extreme, to the point where he didn't even have the strength to stand. What's going on? Why would someone die during the teleportation? A domineering will descended upon the area in an instant, causing all the sorcerers who appeared in the teleportation circle to bend their waists and almost fall to the ground. Apart from Grim, Wizard Roy was also in trouble during the teleportation. He was responsible for controlling the long-distance teleportation, just like the helmsman on a ferry. The sudden appearance of such an inexplicable unforeseen event and violent upheaval in the middle of the journey could easily be imagined how heavy the pressure was on him. After the teleportation was completed, Wizard Roy let out a roar and fell to the ground. His entire wizard robe was drenched in sweat. Therefore, when faced with the high-ranking wizard's questions, he tried to gather his power several times, but he still could not open his mouth. The enormous will circled around the teleportation formation, and it detected some peculiar energy auras that had yet to completely dissipate. Fate. This is the smell of fate. Damn it, that bastard Mesa has extended her tentacles to me again. Soon, the terrifying will arrived above Grim. Kid, who are you? Why did that Medusa specifically target you with this attack? Humph, it's a good thing the teleportation was completed in time. Otherwise, the whole squad would have died with you. Grim coughed violently and spat out blood happily. Unavoidably, his body was invaded by the incomparably violent energy of blood and energy and the extremely bizarre energy of space. His body was already riddled with holes and was extremely fragile. Luckily, he protected himself in time and did not let the strange energy invade his heart of law. Otherwise, he would have suffered a huge loss. But even so, his injuries were extremely serious. Traces of the strange energy invading his body and soul could be felt everywhere. This was very scary for an elemental wizard like him. If he did not find a way to get rid of it, it would be impossible for Grim to become a law-defying wizard again. Grim struggled for a long time before he finally managed to sit up on the ground and spoke with difficulty. Sir, my name is Grim. I'm a newly promoted rank 4 wizard from the scattered forest of towers. Nonsense. Of course I know your identity and background. I'm asking you, what's your relationship with that Mesa? Sir, I have nothing to do with the Great Witch Mesa. But I do have something to do with the new Witch of Destiny, Alice. Grim stuttered. There's a new Witch of Destiny? Don't tell me you joined forces to kill Mesa's Destiny clone? The will seemed to be quite interested in this question, and its tone became more relaxed. Sir, please understand. I don't know the specifics. I just know that I had some contact with Alice before, and somehow got involved in a battle of destiny, and then that Alice became the leader of the Witch of Destiny? It seems like the Magus world's consciousness couldn't tolerate that bastard Mesa's misdeeds anymore. They actually used this method to cut off her claws. Alright, now I understand why you were attacked by that bastard Mesa. It seems like you're quite favored by the plane's consciousness. Even this kind of attack didn't kill you. The blessing of the Witch of Destiny. Tell me honestly, are you lovers with that Alice? Otherwise, why would she be willing to bless your soul with such an important blessing? The blessing of the Destiny Witches? Grimm raised his head with a confused look on his face. You still don't know, kid. Your soul is protected by the power of destiny. With this, no matter where you are, your basic luck will be 100 times stronger than ordinary people. It's no wonder you survived that attack. Sir, is this blessing very precious? Kid, do you really not know, or are you pretending? Anything that was related to fate and luck was a treasure that one could only wish for. Even if that lass is at the peak of rank 4, I'm afraid she'll have to pay the price of almost half of her life to do this. The Will sighed softly. What if she's at rank 3? Grimm's body suddenly tensed up, and he asked in panic. If she's only at rank 3, then she'll have to pay at least 80% of her life. Grimm's face turned abnormally pale, and his body swayed once more. It seems like there are a lot of secrets between you two, but I don't care. I only know that this mission is within my jurisdiction. If anyone dares to put their dirty hands in my jurisdiction, I'll chop them off. The last sentence was obviously not directed at Grimm and the others. Instead, it was transmitted to another place through some kind of power of law, and it was met with a cold and resentful snort. All right, the rest of you can go back and rest. Roy, come to my base and report to me personally. With that, the powerful will disappeared in an instant, and all the wizards in the area could finally breathe freely. You heard what the Lord said. Go back to your base and rest. Wizard Roy was indeed a powerful elite wizard. In just a short period of time, he had recovered some of his stamina and energy, and could move like normal again. He coldly glanced at Grimm, who was sitting on the ground. He didn't have a good impression of this guy who almost caused his ship to capsize. However, the Lord just now did not pursue Grimm's crimes, so he couldn't do anything about it. He could only let out a muffled grunt and turn around to walk away. Grimm shook his head and let out a bitter laugh. He rejected Wizard Holly's help and stood in front of the pool of dark red blood left behind by the Mangus siblings within the teleportation formation, lost in thought. Only then did he slowly return to the wizard's pagoda within the Exodar camp. Grimm only stayed in the Exodar camp for 3 days. After completing his mission and receiving his rewards, he returned to the sorcerer world without any hesitation. His first stop was naturally the Living Castle. This was the only interplane teleportation circle in the central part of the continent that led directly to the outside world. The team that welcomed him outside the teleportation circle was especially grand. There were a total of 6 grade 4 wizards. Naturally, this included President Fred and Vice President Merva. In addition, there was also Witch Clara, Elder Nicholas, Elder Matthew, and the Gold family's Monash, who had the Titan bloodline. Elder Gaia. Chapter 1142. Grimm's successful return caused quite a stir in the Talon region of the outpost. The demons and monsters that had sworn that Grimm would fall in this mission disappeared without a trace, replaced by rumors that Grimm would become the number 1 magus in the central continent. In truth, half of the rank 4 magi that had come to welcome Grimm had deep conflicts with him. However, at their level, the chances of a direct confrontation were so small that it was negligible. Instead, it was more likely that they would resort to trickery in private. Grimm stepped out of the teleportation formation, covering his mouth and coughing a few times before squeezing out a smile to welcome the welcoming crowd. The first to greet him was naturally President Freed. This old fox narrowed his eyes and examined Grimm, a trace of surprise appearing on his face. Elder Grimm, it's been hard on you. Grimm covered his mouth and coughed a few more times, stabilizing his aura after a long while. He smiled wryly. I wasn't careful and fell into someone's trap. My soul has suffered some damage. Looks like I'll have to find a place to recuperate for 100 years. After saying this, he coughed violently again. President Freed turned and exchanged glances with the other elders, smiling once more. Elder Grimm, you've made some sacrifices for the sake of the association, so the association will naturally not treat you unfairly. This is the compensation that we've come up with after our discussion. We hope that Elder Grimm can forget the unhappiness of the past and truly become a part of the association." Grimm looked around and received a storage ring from President Freed. After greeting everyone, he used the teleportation formation behind him to return to the blazing flame monarch. Once Grimm's haggard figure disappeared from the teleportation formation, the smiles on the Magi's faces disappeared, replaced by solemn expressions. "How was it? Is it true that he was injured?" President Freed asked. "The information from Isorda's camp has been verified. On the way back, Grimm was attacked by that rank 4 Magus from the Magus Association. The situation was extremely dangerous." Vice President Merva answered. "The Magus Association? I'm afraid this is going to be troublesome," which Clara could not help but mutter. The Sorcerer Association was one of the 3 major sorcerer forces in the sorcerer world. Their people died on the way back for no reason. Although he had self-destructed on his own accord, the other party clearly did not think so. An investigation was necessary, and it might even affect the harmonious relationship between the Scattered Tower Forest and the Wizard Association. This matter involved a rank 4 Magus, so it was extremely troublesome to deal with. "That's not all." Merva sighed again. "I heard that the Dark Witch in their team also died in the other world. It might have something to do with Grimm. I'm worried that the Northern Witches will soon make a fuss." Northern Witches, hearing this ear-piercing name, all the Magi present could not help but frown and laugh bitterly. Yang Ling had originally thought that the legendary fire wizard would help them by pulling him into the association, but from the looks of it now, it seemed that the group would have to shoulder all the troubles and disturbances for him. Why didn't this troublesome fire wizard die in the other world? If he died in the other world, all the troubles and disturbances would be gone. How relaxing would that be? Everyone silently thought about it, frowning and sighing. All of them were extremely vexed. All right. Didn't you hear my question just now?" President Fred frowned deeply. "I asked, is he really injured?" "He should be injured." Sorceress Clara nodded. "I can sense that his spirit is indeed injured. The only thing I don't know is whether his soul is injured. If his soul is injured, his future advancement will be—" Sorceress Clara did not finish the second half of her sentence, but everyone present understood what she meant. What was the most important thing to a Magus? Soul. The physical body could be modified, changed, and even completely transformed into energy. There were pros and cons to such a change, but it still could not stop Magi from advancing. Only the origin of the soul was the only thing that Magi could not touch. Any changes to it would have an unpredictable and irreversible impact on the Magus. Once the origin of the soul was injured in a battle between Magi, it meant that the foundation for further advancement would be weakened. If they did not find a way to make up for these injuries, their strength would not be able to advance. He has already injured the origin of his soul. This time, the one who spoke was Monash of the Gold family. Elder Gaia. His 3-meter-tall figure was particularly eye-catching, and a strong energy aura flowed on his strange pale golden skin. I can sense the weakness of his soul, and it is not fake. With his injuries, recuperating in seclusion for 100 years is not a bad thing. In my opinion, he won't be able to recover from this injury without 200 or 300 years. And in these 200 or 300 years, I'm afraid it will be difficult for him to even maintain his initial rank 4 strength. As for Monash? Gaia's opinion, the other Magi naturally did not have any objections. After all, among the rank 4 Magi in the central continent, Monash was the most powerful. Gaia. His family had a trace of the powerful bloodline of the ancient Titans, and when he transformed into a gold Titan, his every move had unparalleled terrifying power. In terms of battle strength alone, Monash? Gaia was ranked first among all the Magi in the association. On this point, even the sly and cunning President Fred could not compare to him. Therefore, the others naturally believed in his judgment without a doubt. It's good that he's injured. It's good that he's injured. Elder Nicholas finally revealed a smile. This way, our scattered tower forest can still flourish for a few years. Otherwise, this legendary fire magus will return with a great victory, and I'm afraid that the central continent will be in chaos. The two elders, Nicholas and Matthew, looked at each other, and their expressions became a little more relaxed. It could not be helped. Before this legendary fire magus rose to power, the two of them had stirred up a lot of trouble. Whether it was the siege of the 5 large families or the declaration of war from the Fabris family, they could vaguely see the two of them behind the scenes. To be honest, before this, they really did not take the legendary fire magus and the Crimson family seriously. But now, with Grimm's rise, even the two of them could feel the heavy pressure that was pressing down on them. If Grimm wanted to rise to power in the central continent, it was obvious that he would target those who had enmity or friction with him. This way, the two of them would be forced to stand on the front lines and have a direct confrontation with the legendary fire magus. This was something that the two of them definitely did not want to see. They had asked around and found out that the Magus faction had sent out a total of 16 Grade 4 Magi to the foreign plane battlefield, and only 9 of them had returned alive. Nearly half of the Magi had died, which meant that the remaining Magi were all elites and powerful Grade 4 Magi, and their battle strength was astonishing. They did not have the confidence to defeat this powerful fire magus, who had experienced blood and fire, and the test of life and death. Grimm's return instantly roused the entire Crimson family. In the time that Grimm had left, the entire Crimson family had chosen to lie low and wait. After all, the Crimson family had only risen to power for a short period of time, and they had yet to establish an effective system for nurturing Magi. The new generation that the family nurtured was mostly limited to rank 1, and those that could cross the threshold of rank 2 and become high-ranked Magi could be counted on one hand. The only ones that could hold up the family were the core Magi of the older generation that had grown up with Grimm. When news of Grimm's return spread throughout the family, no matter where they were or how important their tasks were, all the core Magi put down everything and returned to the family's encampment, awaiting an audience with the family leader. Pine Tower City. With the rise of the Crimson family, the former Pine Tower town had undergone a series of expansions and remodeling. Its population and business were now comparable to large cities. The family had moved most of its core to the Crimson Wings, and the blazing Flame Monarch and the surrounding 10 kilometers had been turned into Grimm's personal residence and seclusion. Under normal circumstances, anyone who trespassed into this area without being summoned by Grimm would be attacked by terrifying fire creatures and powerful magical equipment. For a time, the blazing Flame Monarch that had been sealed for 20 years was opened once more. The towering pillar of fire stood in the depths of the forest that had gradually degenerated into an ordinary primordial forest, displaying its might to the world from afar. More and more scarlet higher-ups gathered in Pine Pagoda City. Head Butler Gargamel, high rank 2, of the family's Tower Forest headquarters, the person in charge of the family's northern branch, which Merrill, Peak Grade 2. The leader of the family's vampire branch, Soros, initial rank 3, the leader of the Blood Elves, IZA Tier 2 Advanced. Family. Lance Plains Eternal Capital Administrator, Cloned Brain Sock, Tier 2 Advanced. Chairman of the Gnome Business Alliance, Cabby, initial level 2. The leader of her family's violent blood group, Dusula? Lascelle, intermediate Tier 2. Clan Demonized Goblin Leader and Goblin Academy of Science Dean Ganga, initial Tier 2. Head of the family's assassination department, Insect Lich Bliss, Tier 2 Advanced. Clan Gnome Plains Magus Guardian, Wind Wizard Dara, Peak Grade 1. Apart from that, there were also a few core members of the family. Dragonman Zacha, high rank 2, Gnome Ripper Tigula, high rank 2, Medusa, Peak Grade 1, Manticore Sharon, high rank 1. Chapter 1143. They rode on a small airship and passed through a forest that spanned over 200 miles. They then passed through the twisting fire caves and the lava hall before finally arriving at the blazing flame monarch under the watchful eyes of a large number of fire creatures and high-level magical machinery. Grimm received them in the Wizard Hall on the second level of the Wizard's Pagoda. The massive Wizard Hall was 10,000 square meters in size. A large obsidian table was placed in the center, with intricately designed high-back stone chairs on both sides. There were 3 high chairs at one end of the table, arranged in a triangular formation. The one sitting at the front was, of course, the mysterious legendary fire wizard who had single-handedly created the Crimson family, Lord Grimm. Behind him were 2 high chairs, one on the left and the other on the right. On the left was the Blood Queen Mary, who controlled most of the power in the family. On the right was the leader of the Witches of Destiny, Alice, who rarely showed herself in front of others. The 3 of them were undoubtedly the true core of the Crimson family. After not seeing each other for a long time, the clan members who entered the hall one after another bowed to the 3 clan higher-ups who were seated at the head of the hall. Only then did they carefully and safely take their seats according to the order in which they were seated. Their gazes were also secretly sizing up this mysterious and powerful legendary family leader. Grimm was wearing a bright red wizard robe today. The gorgeous robe was decorated with glowing wizard runes and magical lines, and a dense aura of fire danced on it. His entire body was completely covered by this loose robe, only revealing a slightly pale face. Grimm's face could be considered handsome. His long black hair was tied behind him with an intricate hoop, and he had deep brows and a tall nose bridge. His thin lips were tightly pursed, and the edges of his lips were slightly cold. After being tempered by blood and fire countless times, Grimm's naivety had completely faded away. What replaced it was a profound and mysterious aura of wisdom and foresight. However, Grimm's face was a little too pale. It was a little different from his usual image of glistening skin and surging blood energy. He gave off a feeling of weakness after recovering from a serious illness. The family members saw this and could not help but feel suspicious. Could it be that the rumors that the family leader had returned with heavy injuries were true? Seeing everyone take their seats, Grimm covered his mouth with his fist and coughed a few times. He then looked up at the crowd, and his gaze finally landed on Gargamel, who was first to the left. "Since everyone is here, then, Gargamel, you will first report the basic situation of the family's headquarters these past few years." "Yes." Gargamel hurriedly stood up and bowed. After receiving Grimm's approval, he took out a thick account book and began to read it in detail. Currently, the only area that the family directly controls in the scattered forest of towers is Alovis. Through subsidiary families or other organizations, we indirectly control areas such as the Red Cloud Terrace, Tranquil Pasture, Crow Ridge, Hunter's Coast, Lake Mena. The Crimson Dynasty's territory has expanded by another 300 kilometers to the northwest, bordering the Randner family's territory. The 3rd Magic Machine Division has already advanced north, and has penetrated 400 kilometers into the Dark Forest. They are currently building an outpost camp. According to the information they sent back, the attacks from the Lord of the Dark Forest are getting more intense, and it is very likely that a war will break out in the near future. Their commander has already requested reinforcements from high-ranked magi. The Alovis region has all belonged to the family. Currently, there are 7 rank 1 resource points, 22 rank 2 resource points, and 106 rank 3 resource points. There are 97 magi belonging to the family. Among them, there are 5 rank 3 magi, 26 rank 2 magi, and 66 rank 1 magi. The family's resources. The total amount of magic crystals this year is 2,179,780. The total amount of magic crystals spent is 1,463,500. The detailed list of resources is as follows, 1 by 1, 1 by 1. Gargamel listed out the family's affairs according to what everyone was concerned about. It was simple and clear. However, he did not announce the more detailed and comprehensive information. After all, it involved many core affairs of the Crimson family, and could only be revealed in a one-on-one report. After Gargamel was the fire dragon Witch Merrill, who was in charge of the branch in the north. The Crimson family's development in the north had not been too smooth, and they had been given the cold shoulder and suppression by the various Magi factions. The most obvious were the Dark Witches and the Deceit Witches. This made it extremely difficult for the Crimson family to expand their influence outside of the Icewind territory. However, the White Tower was backed by the Dark Forest, and the area there was vast and rich in resources. Even if the other areas were restricted, they could still bring in a lot of magical beasts for the family. Apart from these two territories, the Crimson family also had two secondary planes that were rich in resources with their own characteristic. The Wind Wizard Sella, who represented the Goblin plane, and the Subbrain Sock, who represented the Lance plane, also gave a simple report on the basic situation in their respective areas. During the time Grimm was away, the Goblin plane had amassed 670,000 tons of refined magic alloy, which was enough to give the Crimson family another 20,000 to 30,000 metal magical machines, or 12 floating airships, or 2 magical puppet dragons. However, Grimm's Kalos alloy was almost depleted, and before he could get new supplies, he could only temporarily store these magic iron alloys and synthetic metals for future use. In the Lance plane, with the Grade 3 brain monster overseeing it, the Eternal Capital was an impregnable city of steel. The Dragon Lords had suffered enough from the battle magical machines, but they could not catch them all in one fell swoop, so they could only choose to stay away from these invaders. A large number of Dragon Lords moved further away, and even formed smaller dragon alliances. This caused the Crimson family's dragon hunting team to have their hands tied, and their profits began to plummet. However, in the past 20 years, the Eternal Capital still had 11 dragons in the account. 5 of them were sold, and the other 6 were imprisoned in the Crimson Wing, undergoing witchcraft modification or taming. After the lords of various places finished their reports, it was the turn of the external forces and affiliated organizations. Among them, Ganga, the leader of the Goblin Occult Goblins and the director of the Goblin Academy of Sciences, was the most excited. He almost roared as he announced 3 important pieces of news. First, the Goblin Academy of Sciences had developed a true mana amplifier. This was also one of the most difficult requirements for the Crimson family to build a Thunder God Titan. The so-called mana amplifier was actually a magical machine's version of an elemental energy resonator. It could make the elemental energy flowing in the magical machine resonate with the magical elements in nature, thus amplifying the effects of magical attack. Of course, the success of the Goblin Academy of Sciences had a lot to do with the special effect of the focus crystal that Grimm had discovered. However, the success that Ganga announced this time had only been verified in the laboratory. If they wanted to use it on the Tier 6 Thunder God Titan, it would probably take a long time to polish and adjust it. Second, the magic exoskeleton combat system. Wizards had the help of magic tools, but goblins did not have the talent of elemental magic. Even with the help of magical machines, they could not use elemental magic attack. However, the newly born occult goblins were in between. Although they did not have the talent, they could use the runes to grasp the basic use of magical energy. Therefore, in order to increase the attack power of the occult goblins, Director Ganga put in a lot of effort to research the magic exoskeleton combat system. They were like pieces of magic equipment that could be assembled on the body of the occult goblins, assisting them in elemental magic attacks. Grimm could not help but be interested when he heard this. If these magic exoskeletons were modified according to the body shape or elemental attributes of human wizards, would they also be suitable for human wizards? Without hesitation, Grimm ordered Gargamel to send some wizards and apprentices to work with Director Ganga to find out if the magic exoskeleton combat system could be transplanted. Third, the blueprint of the Thunder God Titan had been completed. Director Ganga could not wait to apply to Grimm for the assembly and debugging of the first generation of the prototype. The Thunder God Titan was a powerful magical machine that could reach Tier 6 in theory. The amount of high-grade materials and rare resources needed to build such a machine was astronomical, not to mention the countless technical problems that needed to be solved. Disregarding everything else, just the energy core of the Thunder God Titan required 3 to 5 magic furnaces to share the workload in order to operate it. If Ganga wanted it to fight at full power, Grimm would need to build another super magic furnace. After listening to Director Ganga's application and speech, Grimm thought for a moment and took out a knowledge crystal from his storage ring. He slid it from the table to the old goblin. "Don't rush to build it. You should digest and absorb the knowledge in this crystal first." "Master, what's this?" Director Ganga asked in confusion as he raised the crystal. "The basic principle of the Arcane Empire's energy core," Grimm said lightly. "I'm afraid that the Arcane Empire is the most practical and effective one in the entire multiverse when it comes to the in-depth application of basic energy. I believe that if you understand their arcana theories, your control and application of magic energy will definitely reach a higher level." Chapter 1144. My Lord, what happened to the Arcane Kingdom? Everyone knew that the Lord had been sent to the battlefield between the wizard camp and the Arcane Kingdom, so they were very concerned about the topic. "The Arcane Kingdom has fallen apart, it no longer exists." Grimm covered his mouth with his fist and coughed a few times. He shook his head and sighed. It was such a huge empire, only slightly inferior to the sorcerer's world, but it was completely destroyed. Even if some of the arcane remnants escape to live in seclusion, I'm afraid they won't dare to show their faces again in the next 1,000 years. The wizards present were also knowledgeable people. They had long heard of the so-called Arcane Kingdom from various sources. At this moment, listening to the clan leader describe the fall of a huge spellcaster nation in such a casual tone, the regret and shock in his heart could not be any greater. After all, the Sorcerer's World was a huge spellcaster community, somewhat similar to the Arcane Kingdom. However, during the period when the Sorcerer's World was flourishing, it was a period of recovery and calm after the Great War between the Disaster World and the Titans that affected most of the multiverse. Because of this, the Sorcerer's World and the World of Gods were able to develop rapidly, smoothly passing through the weak stage and nurturing their own Rank 9 powerhouses. If it weren't for the protection of these Rank 9 great wizards, it would be wishful thinking for the Sorcerer's World to develop so peacefully. As a Rank 4 wizard, Grimm had already begun to come into contact with some high-level secrets, and he had a certain understanding of the growth and decline of the multiverse. Seriously speaking, the multiverse they were in was a typical high-magic world. The ones driving the changes in the multiverse were two powerful creatures with decisive power, the Disaster Lords and the Titans. The Disaster Lords existed as the evil side, while the Titans were a powerful race born from the will of the multiverse. The Lords of Calamity were powerful and evil creatures that preyed on planes, feeding on the origin of planes. They were one of the biggest tumors in the multiverse. This cancer was contagious. Once the Disaster Lords went out on a large scale, it would be a disaster for the hundreds of millions of planes in the multiverse. Therefore, the Titans were born from the will of the multiverse, and they were born with unparalleled physical strength and violent lightning purification power. The sole purpose of their birth was to travel across the multiverse and eliminate the Calamity Lord. Whenever a fierce battle broke out between the Disaster Overlords and the Titans, both sides would suffer great losses. The Titans retreated to the depths of the multiverse to recuperate, while the Lords of Disaster returned to the Calamity Plane to recuperate. And that period was the best stage of development for the millions of species in the multiverse. Once the Lords of Calamity recovered from their injuries and woke up from their 10,000 years of slumber, the entire multiverse would once again be plunged into a state of turmoil and constant conflict. Whenever this happened, the Titans would gather from the depths of the multiverse and search for traces of the Calamity overlords. Moreover, both sides would never fight alone, and would always rope in vassal forces or races. From there, terrifying planar wars would be waged one after another in every corner of the multiverse. Every time this happened, those large tribes or factions would be forced to take a stand. They would either help the Titans fight the Calamity overlords or help the Calamity overlords wreak havoc in the multiverse. No matter which one it would cause a drastic change in the power structure of the entire multiverse. Some powerful races had just made their debut in the multiverse when they were dragged into an unsuitable war and wiped out by one of the two sides. Some tribes, on the other hand, had hitched a ride on the war and quickly rose to become a powerful force in the multiverse that could not be ignored. Therefore, the entire multiverse was slowly advancing in such a pulse of war. The Calamity overlords and the Titans would both suffer great losses and retreat from the stage, leaving the other races and creatures with a beautiful period of prosperity. When they recovered from their injuries and stepped out of their hibernation, the entire multiverse would be engulfed in the flames of war. The newly grown weeds would either be burned or survived, and would soon enter the next cycle of the universe. Therefore, during the peaceful times, every powerful race and force was desperately trying to increase their strength so that they could get through the next universe war in their best state. The sorcerer world was very fortunate to have risen during the golden period of development for the multiverse. Now, as the multiverse had been peaceful for such a long time, the Calamity overlords had once again become restless. The first to awaken were the weaker Calamity overlords. Their strength was either at level 6 or level 7, and they began to stir up trouble in the entire multiverse, starting wars everywhere, invading those planes that had just grown up, absorbing their planar origins in order to recover their strength as quickly as possible. Their awakening also meant that the more powerful Calamity overlords were about to awaken as well. Once the Calamity worlds became active and dangerous again, it would be the time for a large number of Titans to step out of the multiverse and fight them to the death. It was because of his understanding of the background of the universe that Grimm could not help but sigh. The arcane kingdom might not be weak, but it was not the right time to rise. Therefore, it became the first target of some of the Calamity overlord. As for the intervention of the sorcerer world, it was more like a windfall, using the blades of the Calamity overlords to snatch some leftovers and scraps. Therefore, if the newly awakened Calamity overlords were a pack of terrifying jackals, then the sorcerer world was like a group of scavenging vultures. Both sides cooperated, but also had conflict. The relationship between the two camps could be said to be extremely chaotic. Of course, such a grand world view of the multiverse could only be considered as a preliminary understanding of it after Grimm reached level 4. As for Mary and the others, their perspective was mostly limited to the sorcerer world and could not analyze the deep reasons behind the destruction of the arcane kingdom. But Grimm was not in the mood and obligation to enlighten them about the world view. Therefore, after a brief sigh, Grimm shifted his attention back to the internal affairs of the family. The goblin group, led by Cabby, stepped forward to report the situation. After the previous goblin rebellion, the goblin camp had been divided by the Crimson family. They were divided into the Goblin Trade Union, which focused on trade and smuggling, the Goblin Wizards, Goblin Mechanical Warlocks, and the newly divided Demonized Goblins. As Cabby's individual strength was weak, he became the new president of the Goblin Trade Union. He was in charge of all the goblin trade and smuggling activities. With his flexible mind, flexible body, and magic crystals, the Goblin Trade Union expanded its business to every corner of the sorcerer world. From the Silver Alliance in the west, to the Sorcerer Association in the east, to the Northern Witches in the north, and to the scattered towers where the headquarters were located. Goblins could be seen in almost all the Sorcerer World's territories. Busy figures could be seen. Grimm's reputation as a Tier 4 legendary fire wizard and the Crimson family's illustrious name supported them in their expansion. Of course, generations of goblins worked hard and risked their lives for it. After all, every region was controlled by fixed local forces and organizations of all sizes. They did not dare to interfere with the business activities of the major forces, but they dared to attack the small and medium-sized forces' caravans. Therefore, when the goblin caravans traveled around the Sorcerer World, they were often harassed and attacked by the local forces. The weaker local forces might not be able to defeat the goblin caravans protected by the metal magic equipment, but some of the more famous organizations still had the means to detain or plunder the goods and properties of the goblin caravans. In these 100 years, more than 70 goblin caravans had successively perished in the vast land of the Sorcerer World due to various reasons. The insect Lich Bliss led the assassination department, traveled around the continent day and night, investigating the attacks on the goblin caravans and punishing the enemies. This operation was considered successful in the scattered towers, but it was difficult to extend it to the areas ruled by the three major forces. After all, Grimm's reputation as a legendary fire wizard was only known in the scattered towers. Outside of the central continent, there were only a handful of people who knew of his name. Grimm listened attentively as his subordinates stood up one after another to report the situation of their respective missions. He didn't express his opinion or interfere too much. He only asked a few questions about some of the issues he was concerned about. After everyone finished their reports, Grimm coughed softly, and the hall immediately became silent. Grimm looked around and glanced at the familiar faces, finally breaking his silence. Grimm raised his hand and released two milky white orbs of light, allowing them to float in front of him. From your reports, I can see that everyone has been working hard during this period of time. Now it's time to give out rewards. These are the coordinates of the two secondary planes I just obtained from the Scattered Towers Association. They are both small planes that have been developed quite well. Hearing Grimm's words, the eyes of the various scarlet magi in the hall lit up, their gazes burning with passion as they stared at the milky white balls of light. Grimm smiled faintly. Then let's discuss which two forces in the family will obtain the rights to control these two secondary planes. Chapter 1145. The right to control the plane. The family was preparing to give up control of the plane? The Scarlet Magi present could not help but look fervent. The Scarlet family currently only had two secondary planes. One was the Goblin plane, which provided the family with a large amount of metal ores. The other was the Lance plane, which was the family's main plane of resources for the dragons. From what the family head had said, the family was no longer prepared to manage and develop these two new planes. Instead, they were going to hand over control of them to a certain organization within the family. How could this not make some of the sorcerers from the powerful families excited and irritated? Ignoring the excited expressions on the faces of the family members, Grimm continued his introduction. The Heisen plane has an internal space of more than 4 million square kilometers. There are 2 continents and the rest is the ocean. The 2 continents have a total area of more than 1.6 million square kilometers, and are densely covered with all sorts of primitive forests and aboriginals. The magic density is average, and the laws of the plane are basically complete. The resources of the magical creatures are ordinary. Initial estimates are that after further development, we can earn around 800,000 magic crystals per year. What about the powerhouses of the plane? It can't be that they've been completely wiped out, right? Mary, who was behind Grimm, could not help but sit up straight, showing a trace of interest. There aren't many rank 4 creatures there, and the ones who rule are the forest trolls that are worshipped by the tribes. It's said that their king is a rank 4. Then I'll take it. I'll represent the vampire faction and do my best to develop the Heisen plane. If you can, the entire Hyzen Plain will be yours. However, you'll have to pay 400,000 magic crystals to the family every year. Alright, no problem. If I can't find any Magus resources there, I'll capture those trolls and sell them as slaves. Mary glared fiercely at Grimm as she spoke. Grimm smiled indifferently, and with a wave of his hand, the milky white orb of light that represented the Hyzen Plain flew into Mary's hands. Within the hall, the vampires under Mary were all beaming with joy. There were still many differences between the vampires and ordinary magi. Now that they had a plane that belonged to the blood race, they could do their best to transform it into the most suitable environment for the blood race. That way, it would be much easier to nurture the descendants of vampires. The mountain plain has a dimensional space of 1.8 million square kilometers. It has a single element of Earth. My initial guess is that it's a small dimensional space that was separated from the Earth elemental plane. There were no oceans, no forests, and not many creatures from the plains. There were only broken hills of various sizes. However, according to our investigations, there is a strong aura of Earth elemental magic at the bottom of the hill. There should be a rich reserve of magic ores. Whoever wants to control this plane must pay the family 200,000 magic crystals every year. After briefly introducing the situation of the last secondary plane, Grimm looked around at everyone and asked softly, "Is there any family or faction that wants to obtain this plane? A single Earth element. Magic or, after exchanging a few glances, the Goblin Business Alliance with Cabby as the representative showed great interest. The gnomes were the best at mining, so it was best to leave it to them. Therefore, Grimm nodded and tossed the second ball of milky white light to Cabby. Apart from the two secondary planes, Grimm raised his hand and released more than 30 strange items that floated in the red light barrier. These were some of the resources and rare treasures that he had obtained from this trip to the plane. Of course, the truly precious items were kept in his personal treasury. The ones that he took out were resources that he had no use for. With the replenishment of these items, the list of items that could be exchanged within the family would have a qualitative leap. Basic arcane principles, analysis of spatial energy, mutated biology, encyclopedia of star beasts, secrets of the gods, journey through the sea of stars, core device of arcane puppet, unstable arcane crystal, arcane bracelet, restores half of the mana consumed for every successful spell cast. Note: only usable by arcanists. Mask of Misfortune. Mask can designate one enemy to receive a battlefield penalty of -1 luck. Crimson Scythe. Strength +2. Every attack can convert 20% of the damage taken into vitality. Crystal Wand. Spirit +2. Mana recovery +2. Talisman of Necromancy. Can enslave wild undead that are of a lower level than the user, up to a maximum of 3. Alchemy Flask. Can forcefully purify up to 100 grams of magical alloy per day. Golden Feather. The feather of a holy creature, the rock. Can be used to create holy items. Dragon Shield. Defensive shield made from the scales of a pure-blooded dragon. Magic resistance +20. Many rare treasures floated in front of the crowd, each of them emitting an alluring magical radiance. Especially a few of them, the radiance and color spectrum that lingered around them were clearly different from usual. After some analysis, it was obvious that these items were Grade 3 treasures. To the Scarlet Magi, these were things that they could only dream of. Putting everything else aside, just the few Tier 3 sorcerers in the family were all staring at these treasures with fiery and passionate gazes. Gargamel, keep these items and put them in the family's warehouse. Once you've estimated a suitable value, put them into the family's exchange list. All members of the family are free to exchange for them. Yes. Gargamel replied and hurriedly gestured for Amelia to keep the treasures one by one. After doing all this, Grimm muttered to himself for a moment before speaking again. Stepping out of the Magus world this time has given me a preliminary understanding of the endless sea of stars. I feel that the Scarlet family needs to send a group of people to the outer regions to participate in the search for resources there. At this point, Grimm suddenly looked at the strangely shaped cloned brain sock. Sock, go back and inform the brain monster, Gaz Ruvi. He'll be in charge of the security of the camp that's about to be established. Kirby. Grimm then turned his gaze to the goblin Kirby. You'll be in charge of the business model of the camp. Yes. Yes. All right, is there anything else you need to report? Master. I have something to report. Grimm was stunned and turned to look. The one who had spoken was the dean, Ganga. What is it, Ganga? Yes. Master, our research institute is at a critical juncture. We might need a batch of magic furnaces. Ganga stammered as he rubbed his hands. Hearing Ganga's request, the cloned brain sock could not help but feel anxious. Master, our eternal capital is also in urgent need of magic furnaces. The munitions factory there has been shut down for a long time. Grimm frowned slightly. There wasn't much left of the Kellis alloy that he had obtained from Molten City to make magic furnaces. Now that two of his subordinates had made a request at the same time, even he could not help but feel troubled. He had obtained quite a lot of resources and treasures from his trip to the other world, but he had not heard anything about the rare Kellis alloy. I understand. I'll solve this problem as soon as possible. With the master's words, Ganga and the cloned brain sock did not insist and sat back down peacefully. Since you have nothing else to report, I'll make another announcement. At this point, Grimm looked around at the crowd and smiled faintly. I've decided to hold a public ceremony to announce that Alice and Mary are my lifelong partners. Ah! Ah! As soon as Grimm's voice fell, two shyly and joyful cries came from behind him. Immediately after, the entire hall boiled over with excitement. Tens of voices sounded at the same time, and the sounds of congratulations and congratulations filled the air. All the magi of the family stood up and congratulated the two madams, as well as the master of the family. Amelia and Merrill immediately rushed to Alice and Mary's side, hugging their arms tightly as they laughed softly. In the Magus world, ordinary mortals might have an official marriage ceremony. However, for the high and mighty magi, they would stay together if they liked each other, and would separate if they did not. They did not bind each other with an old-fashioned ceremony like mortals did. However, Grimm's personal habits were that he was willing to give the two ladies a status, which was why he had announced their identities to the world. This kind of behavior was undoubtedly very peculiar among the Magi community, and could even be considered unique. However, Grimm did not care. As long as he was happy and the two ladies liked him, that was enough. As for the two women who were surrounded by the crowd, although they weren't as bashful as mortal women, their faces were still flushed red. They looked at Grimm with shame and anger, but there was also a hint of joy in their eyes. They were happy that Grimm had publicly expressed his feelings, but angry that he had not discussed such a big matter with them beforehand. Mary was fine, as she had long since made it clear that the carriage belonged to Grimm, and had never hidden this from outsiders. However, Alice's identity was a little special. Her feelings and marriage would obviously affect the power structure of the Northern Magi, so it was a little troublesome to handle. However, Grimm's resolute announcement clearly showed that he didn't want Alice to hesitate any longer, and he didn't want to hesitate any longer either. The crowd continued to make noise for a while before leaving the blazing flame monarch excitedly. Just as Grimm stood up, he was blocked by Alice and Mary. "Grimm, why your decision is too rash." Alice's face was red as she grumbled. "Sister Mary might not have a problem, but my identity. In short, you're too rash." "What do you mean I'm not a problem? He didn't ask for my opinion, all right?" It's not like I have to get married." Mary was clearly beaming with joy, but she still put on a proud expression. Grimm grabbed their slender hands and spoke with a solemn expression. "I know it's very rash. However, if I don't force myself, I'll never be able to find a solution to many problems. In the coming period, there will be a lot of trouble for me. Not just the Dark Witches but also the Magus Association. That's why I want the two of you to accompany me through this. Are you willing? The shadow orb is definitely with him. I'll take it back when the time comes, Circe said coldly. In what name? Don't forget that Grimm is now an elder of the Scattered Talon Association. Without any evidence, it will be difficult for us to deal with him. Do you want to cause a head-on conflict between the Dark Witches and the Scattered Talon Association? The elder of the Dark Department interrupted her coldly. Let's find evidence first. Another elder sorcerer sighed and said, didn't they also have sorcerers from the Silver Alliance in their group? Let's start with him first and see if we can get direct evidence that Grimm killed Shunny. With the evidence, we can propose a motion in the Witch Council to mobilize the entire Northern Witches to kill Grimm. Presumably, those old foxes in the Scattered Talon Association won't dare to go against all of us Northern Witches, right? Understood. I'll immediately arrange for someone to contact that wizard from the Silver Alliance. Circe thought for a moment and quickly nodded in agreement. Also, what you did this time was really reckless. The elder couldn't help but lament again. In the situation where you don't know the true strength of the other party, you sent your own sister out, and even lost our holy relic, the Shadow Pearl. If you haven't found the Shadow Pearl before the next clan meeting, I will suggest to Lady Marvina that you be stripped of your position as chief. Seconded. I also agree with Elder Jakito's suggestion. Circe, you've been in the position of chief for too long. It's time for someone else to replace you. Otherwise, wouldn't the entire Dark Witches' headquarters be ruled by the Acra family? As a rank 4 Dark Witch, Circe was the chief of the Dark Witches. Naturally, she had the greatest authority over all the witches and the family's resources. Claudia, the elder of the Dark Witches Division, held great authority over the Dark Witches Assassination Division. Those were all elite witches selected from the Dark Witches' headquarters who were skilled in assassination and sneak attack. As the leader of the Dark Witches Division, Claudia's authority was not much less than Circe's. Jakito, the elder of the Beast Division, was in charge of concocting and nurturing shadow servants. She specialized in creating a powerful shadow army for the Dark Witches, so naturally, she had great authority. The dead Shunny was an elder of the Wizard Division, and was usually mainly responsible for the research of shadow magic and the cultivation of new witches. As Shunny was also born in the Acra family and was a descendant of leader Circe's family, she obeyed the patriarch's words, which led to this unexpected disaster. As for the Lady Marvina that Jakito mentioned, she was a rank 6 Dark Witch. Using the top-notch wizard towers as the nodes of the spell formation, and the tens of thousands of miles of land under their feet as the foundation of the spell formation, such a layout, foresight, and extravagance could only be achieved by great wizards who could destroy the world with a wave of their hands. At this moment, in one of the inner halls of the 7-ring high tower, a new hearing was being held. Chairman Laoyes sat behind his slightly old mahogany round table, listening to a black-robed wizard report on the death of Wizard Mangus in front of him. He used a low and calm voice to ask some questions that interested him. Chairman Laoyes was also a level 4 wizard. His face was full of wrinkles and his hair was white. The black-rimmed glasses on the bridge of his nose gave him the elegance, knowledge, and wisdom of a high-level wizard. On the other side of the hall, behind a tall wooden fence, there were a few dozen wizards sitting on wooden chairs, their faces full of anxiety and nervousness, waiting for the final verdict of the chairman. So you're saying that Wizard Mangus can't be any more dead? Not even a fragment of his soul can be found? Chairman Lloyd asked the rank 3 wizard who was sent out to investigate in a leisurely manner. Yes, sir. How did he die? We've personally visited the wizards who returned with Lord Mangus. According to their memories, Lord Mangus was still normal before returning from the Morian plane, but he suddenly went crazy during the teleportation. It seemed like he wanted to kill a fellow traveler by self-destructing. This has already been confirmed by more than 3 rank 4 magi. Who was the person he wanted to kill? It was a new fire wizard called Grim. He belonged to the Scattered Pagoda Forest Association and was assigned to the same team as Lord Mangus. Is there enmity between them? Chapter 1147. Then what's the conclusion of your investigation? Did Mangles deserve it, or was he plotted against? Chairman Royce adjusted his glasses and asked with a frown. Hearing the chairman's question, the wizards in the auditorium could not sit still anymore. They stood up and protested. Our Lord Mangles must have been plotted against. Sir Chairman, you must avenge him. Looking at the chaotic auditorium, Chairman Royce's face instantly turned gloomy. He snorted, and a domineering aura instantly pressed down from the top of the hall. I don't want anyone to disturb me when I'm interrogating the case. If anyone can't do this, I'll kick him out myself. Sensing the frightening prestige of the rank 4 chairman, these magi who belonged to the same family as Mangles and his sister obediently sat down and patiently continued to listen to the investigation of this death. The Tier 3 wizard, who was sent by the association to investigate the cause of Wizard Mangus's death, secretly swallowed a mouthful of saliva and said with difficulty, "We have no way of knowing what happened in the Morian Plain. Right now, we're applying to the association for a direct investigation on Wizard Grim. However, he has the identity of an elder of the Scattered Tower Forest Association. Without direct evidence, it's difficult for us to get close to him." There's no direct evidence, so there's no indirect evidence? Well, there seems to be a little. Speaking up to this point, the rank 3 wizard in charge of the investigation became even more hesitant. What is it? The rank 4 chairman could not help but ask. When the tragedy happened, the rank 7 great wizard, Sir Ironwald, who was in charge of the Arcane Kingdom's mission, was also there. Listening to his words, it seems that he knows who the mastermind behind Lord Mangles' death is. But with our level, a rank 7 great wizard, even if the other party really knew something, probably no one in the entire Wizard Association would dare to question him about it. It was no wonder that the rank 3 wizard in charge of the investigation was hesitant and hesitant. Well, I've basically understood the whole process of the incident. At this point, Chairman Lauyes raised his head and swept a glance at the magi of the Mangles siblings who were waiting anxiously. He said coldly, "Regarding your request for revenge, I, the chairman, will directly reject it. I will continue to report this case to the higher-ups of the association and ask them to send higher-ranked wizards to contact the 2 travelers. Before that, I will not make any conclusions about the death of Wizard Mangus." Under the stern and dignified gaze of Chairman Lauyers, the magi from the Munger's siblings' family could only hang their heads in dejection and accept everything. "All right, all of you can leave now. The next case that needs to be handled is the death of Wizard Hannah's curse. The person involved and the investigating wizard can come in now." Following the orderly exit and entry of the magi, the judgment hall was replaced with a new batch of people and new stories. Blazing Flame Monarch. As the Crimson Sorcerers left the Wizard's Pagoda one after another, the place once again became grim, Alice and Mary's world. Alice was still calm and collected, but her slightly anxious eyes revealed a trace of concern. "How's the origin of your soul? Is it badly injured?" Mary also quietened down, looking at Grim with the same concern. Grim had already completed the elemental energy transformation of his body and mind. Any damage could be repaired by replacing or reassembling the elemental energy. Logically speaking, there should not be a situation where his body was damaged and could not recover for a long time. If it really did happen, it could only mean that the damage to his body had already reached the origin of his soul. The damage to his body was only a reflection of the damage to his soul. This kind of injury was usually very difficult to recover from. The sudden self-destruction of that fellow from the Wizard Association has damaged the origin of my soul. I'm afraid I'll need a long period of recuperation to recover. After giving a simple explanation of his injuries, Grimm curiously asked Alice, "Compared to my injuries, I'm actually more concerned about how that fellow from the Wizard Association was controlled by the Great Witch Mesa. Could it be that the Great Witch Mesa can control the mind of a level 4 magus at will?" Mary's face was also filled with shock and fear. Compared to the sorcerers who lived in the plain world, the great sorcerers were a completely different species. Due to excessive mutation or extreme modification, great magi were completely different from ordinary magi in terms of physique, bloodline, and soul. Hence, whenever great magi were mentioned, even a person like Mary who was not afraid of anything would be filled with awe. A great witch who could control the life and death of a level 4 magus at will. Just thinking about it was terrifying. "You've overestimated the Great Witch Mesa." Alice chuckled. "She doesn't have the power to control the life and death of a level 4 magus from a distant plane. The reason she could control that magus to self-destruct was because of the seed of destiny that she planted hundreds of years ago." "Seed of destiny? Hundreds of years ago?" Grimm cried out in disbelief. The Witches of Destiny are a very unique magus profession. This profession has almost lost all offensive and defensive abilities, focusing all their power on divination and perception of destiny. However, this doesn't mean that the Witches of Destiny have no offensive power. It's just that their attacking methods are too strange and unimaginable. The most common method they use is to control destiny and use the power of destiny to destroy their enemies. The way they control destiny is to plant a seed of destiny in the river of destiny, branded with their own soul imprint, and implant it into the key characters that may affect a certain branch of destiny. This means that hundreds of years ago, when Magus Magus was still very weak, Great Witch Mesa implanted the seed of destiny with her own weak soul imprint into his mind. However, this seed of destiny did not take the opportunity to grow and devour his soul imprint. It only lurked in the depths of his soul. This way, she can activate the seed of destiny whenever she thinks it's appropriate and temporarily control the fate node. However, the stronger the fate node is, the weaker this control will be, and the shorter the duration. This is why she could only use the irreversible method of self-destruction to attack. There's another person's seed of consciousness lurking in his soul imprint, but the wizard has never been able to detect it. Mary was shocked. If the seed of destiny is activated and remains active, it will naturally be noticed by the parasitic wizards. But the great thing about Mesa is that she can keep the seed of destiny in a sealed state, without any conscious activity, and naturally, the host will not be able to detect it. Only at the moment of activation, the seed of destiny will instantly burst out with all its power and control everything in the host. Alice could not help but sigh. "You mean, this kind of hidden seed of destiny can't be detected at all, even you can't distinguish it, and everyone around us might suddenly become our enemy at some point in time?" Grimm asked while gnashing his teeth. That's right. That's right. It was no wonder that he was so angry. During the entire mission period of the Arcane Kingdom, he had invested a lot of resources and effort on the Mangles siblings. He also hoped to rely on them to find a perfect entry point in the Wizard Association so that they could open the door of a huge wizard organization. But now, he had been protecting them all the time, supporting them through several difficult moments of the mission, and the final reward was a terrible self-destruction. If it wasn't for Grimm's strength that allowed him to survive the explosion, the outcome would have been different. It's not that the seed of destiny can't be detected at all, it just needs the other party to let go of all their minds. Do you think I have the time and the power to detect the minds of everyone around us? Alice could not help but smile bitterly. So you mean, we have no means to prevent the invasion of the Great Witch Mesa's fate? We can't always be on guard against the people around us in everything we do in the future, right? Grimm's expression could not help but become dignified. Don't worry. Alice comforted him. Such a method is very extravagant even for a great witch. If the seed of destiny is too weak, it naturally can't threaten us. And if it's implanted in the body of a powerful wizard, the probability of being discovered is quite high. The wizard Magus who attacked you should be a semi-advanced wizard. He's not a pure grade 4 wizard. Otherwise, the control of the seed of destiny wouldn't be to this extent. Hearing Alice's explanation, Grim was a little relieved. Okay, don't talk about such a depressing thing anymore. By the way, Grim, what did you get from this trip to the other plane? It shouldn't be just those bits and pieces of rubbish, right? Mary couldn't help but get excited when she talked about treasures. She looked anxious and curious. Those were precious arcane books and weapons full of foreign styles, but when it came to Mary, they were just bits and pieces of rubbish. Grim could not help but be speechless. The trip to the Arcane Kingdom had indeed brought Grim a lot of income, and he also had the desire to show off in front of his two partners. Grim smiled and waved his hand to show off the real harvest of the trip. Dozens of dark red bubbles suddenly floated in the hall, and each bubble contained a strange item. From books to materials, from treasures to weapons, there was everything that should be there, filling Ling Lang's eyes. And among them, the energy aura lingering around them was emitting a misty purple light. This was the elemental aura unique to Grade 4 items. Meanwhile, two dark red bubbles hovered above the Tier 4 items, radiating a different kind of light. The light radiating from these bubbles gave off an oppressive feeling. Chapter 1148. The divine artifact that Alice was referring to was a supreme grade item. In other words, it was a powerful artifact that surpassed Grade 4. Such an item had already exceeded the limits of the plane's power, so it was difficult to create it in the plane itself. Usually, only the high and mighty gods or great wizards would use certain methods to create or refine them. Such an item would naturally not appear in the hands of a mortal being. Hence, Alice was slightly better in terms of supreme grade items. At least the cards of fate and hourglass in her hands belonged to this category of powerful items. Mary, on the other hand, was a complete novice who had never seen an item of this level. Hence, under the influence of her strong desire, she widened her eyes and walked towards the two dark red bubbles with a heavy heart. She was in a trance and wanted to reach out and embrace them. However, her hand was stopped halfway by another pair of hands. Mary could not help but glare at Alice, who stopped her, but when her gaze met Alice's eyes that were as dazzling as stars, she shuddered and sobered up. What happened to me just now? Alice smiled slightly. Her silky hair draped over her shoulders, and her face was unusually gentle and peaceful. She inexplicably exuded a bewitching and mysterious aura. You've been bewitched. They're divine artifacts, and they have a master at that. That's why they've tried every possible way to escape from here. They've bewitched you and wanted to use your power to escape. I've been bewitched? How? How is this possible? How could I be bewitched by some mindless and senseless items? Are you lying to me? Mary had a look of disbelief on her face. She looked at Alice doubtfully for a few times before her gaze finally landed on Grim. Don't feel strange or surprised, Mary. They're divine artifacts, sacred artifacts, and legendary supreme grade items. It's not an exaggeration to say that they have such power. Grim also laughed bitterly. You should know that ever since I obtained them, I've been constantly harassed and infected by them. I've suffered much more than you. Alice's bright eyes once again swept across the two supreme grade items, and she could not help but sigh inwardly. Shadow Pearl. Cough, I didn't expect the Shadow Pearl of the Dark Witches to fall into your hands. They were probably in a mess right now. By the way, what is the other book-shaped item? Why can I sense a vague divine power aura from it? Since the two ladies were interested, Grim told them about his journey to the Morian plane without hiding anything. Oath and contract. Forming a team. Dark battle. Shunny's death. Shadow Pearl in hand. Evil hoof. floating city, lich, wisdom believer, beast god believer. The series of mysterious incidents and terrifying battles shook the two women to their core, stirring them to their core. It was not until Grimm finished telling them about the evil things that happened during the teleportation that the two women finally heaved a sigh of relief. They were secretly very gratified for him. The Arcane Empire's mission was worthy of being a death mission that even the veteran level 4 wizards had to avoid. The death rate was really high. Seriously speaking, if Grimm's team didn't have a tough opponent like Grimm, the probability of them being wiped out was as high as 70%. Only the Dark Witch, Shunny, might be able to rely on her unique profession ability to avoid death. As long as the others were blocked by the foreign powerhouses, there was basically no chance of escape. Those who fell on the battlefield of the other planes, not only their bodies and equipment would become the enemy's spoils of war, even their broken souls would not be spared. They would become materials for the enemy to play with or desecrate. Especially those unlucky souls whose souls had fallen into the hands of the liches, they would be unable to live or die. They would suffer for 1,000 years and be enslaved until death. Although Alice had the ability to perceive fate, when Grimm came out of the Morian plane where the laws of the plane were chaotic, it was difficult for her to clearly perceive what happened to him. Therefore, after listening to Grimm's story, Alice's curved eyebrows could not help but knit together, and she looked like she was in deep thought. That Shunny really deserves to die, Mary said bitterly. She felt that dying in your hands once wasn't enough, she had to go and die again. Fortunately she's dead. Otherwise I'll find a way to kill her when I come back. Even though she had become a pinnacle grade 3 wizard, Mary still retained her rash and impulsive personality. She would start a fight at the slightest disagreement, and her actions were always faster than her brain. However, Grimm could still hear a trace of love and concern in her fierce words. Grimm stroked Mary's hair affectionately, completely ignoring the threat of Mary baring her teeth. Alice still looked worried, completely ignoring Grimm and Mary's flirting. Why, is it troublesome? Grimm turned around and asked. Yes, it's very troublesome. No matter how big the trouble is, you don't have to worry so much. I'll take care of everything. I'm tired of pretending to be courteous with those guys. If they still don't know how to stop, I'll chop off their dirty hands one by one. Although he was covered in injuries, Grimm's fiery temper did not diminish at all. There was also a hint of domineering aura in his words that was not there before. I'm not afraid of open attacks. As long as I'm here, if the Dark Witches want to push the Northern Witches to declare war on you, they won't be able to get past me first. After all, their actions can't be seen in the light, and they don't have any direct evidence to pin Shunny's death on you. However, I'm worried that they will secretly attack you or the Crimson family. If that happens, I won't be able to stop them. Then let them come. Grimm's eyes gradually turned as red as fire. If they dare to kill a Crimson Magus, I'll dare to kill 2 Dark Witches. In the whole family, the only people I care about the most are the 2 of you. As long as nothing happens to the 2 of you, I can use everything else to fight them. Listening to Grimm's unique words of love, Alice and Mary were both touched and worried. They could not help but lean against Grimm's side, silently planning for him. Grimm, you're not ruthless enough in this matter. If it was me, I would have killed both Mangus and Holly on the way back. That way, there would be no witnesses and no flaws. I saw how those Dark Witches investigated Shunny's death. This time, it was Mary who spoke. As expected, her words were still focused on fighting and killing. But after thinking about it carefully, it seemed to make some sense. If you let them go, then let them go. If that Wizard Holly and Wizard Mangus died at the same time in the other world, the organization behind them will definitely come out to investigate. When that time comes, it will be quite troublesome to deal with. Now that you've saved his life, he should know how to deal with it. Alice regained her calmness and once again analyzed slowly. Oh right, there's something else in here that you need to look at. I always feel that there's something different about this thing, but I can't tell why. Help me take a look at it." Grim suddenly remembered something and turned his gaze to Alice. His big hand gently patted on her waist and butt, and then slowly kneaded there. Alice hurriedly grabbed his evil big hand and asked curiously with a blushing face, "What is it that you don't know?" "It's her." Grim raised his hand and gently pointed at the shadow orb in the air. The orb vibrated, and a huge amount of shadow substance as thick as ink poured out from it. A small part of the hall was covered in shadow substance. Above the orb, a strange human figure that was trapped by the shadow energy appeared. Looking at the figure, it seemed to be a young woman. Her eyes were closed, and she was quietly floating there. Soul shadow. This was a very fragile soul shadow. The instant Alice saw the soul shadow, she straightened her back abruptly, and her eyes were bursting with joy. "The Dimension's son. Grim, how did you get the Dimension's son?" "The Dimension's son." Seeing Alice's look of joy, Grim immediately knew that this shadow was definitely not ordinary. However, this title of Son of the Dimension was far too unfamiliar to him, so he had to be some sort of extraordinary being. After listening to Alice's simple explanation, Grim finally understood what the Dimension's son was. The so-called Dimension's son was also known as the Child of Destiny. Chapter 1149. Wizard World, Celtis Region. Molten Fire City. In the secret chamber of the Wizard's Pagoda. City Master Alfred was dressed in a purple robe, sitting on a stone chair. He looked at the young wizard standing proudly in front of him. He could not help but ask curiously, "Sir Grim, I don't think we are friends. Why have you come to visit me so suddenly?" Grim was dressed in a fiery red wizard robe, holding the fire coral wizard's staff that was taller than him. He looked at Alfred with a smile and said calmly, "I'm here to clear up some conflicts and misunderstandings between us. To show my sincerity, this is a gift I've prepared for you, City Master." Grim then took out an item from his storage ring and pushed it forward. The item floated toward the young man. Alfred hesitated for a moment, but he still took the item and played with it. A knowledge crystal. Alfred glanced at Grim and sent a wisp of his spiritual consciousness into the knowledge crystal. After sensing for a while, he suddenly sat up straight. "What are these?" "Basic principles of arcane techniques, exploration and application of anti-gravity barrier, guide to creating flotation rings, a series of complete and consistent arcane techniques, systematically introducing the entire process from design to creation of the flotation ring, as well as the many issues that needed to be taken care of. With this, he could use it on his wizard's pagoda with just a few minor modifications. As a level 4 wizard, how could Alfred not know the importance of the knowledge crystal in his hands? Since ancient times, there had been many talented people in the wizard world who wanted to create a magical device that could fly and help the wizard's pagoda move. Unfortunately, there were too many problems with wizard techniques that troubled them. Firstly, the source of energy for the wizard's pagoda came from the elemental altar. It needed to continuously absorb an alarming amount of elemental energy from the elemental plane. Once the wizard's pagoda moved, the space waymark of the elemental altar would change as well. Then, the space link between the wizard's pagoda and the elemental plane would close naturally. Hence, when the wizard's pagoda moved, the space waymark would always be anchored to the elemental plane. This was a problem that countless genius magi could not solve even after exhausting their brainpower. Secondly, in order to make the wizard's pagoda fly, they had to reduce its weight. In that case, finding a new material to build the wizard's pagoda was the key to maintaining a balance between its defense and weight. These many difficult problems had always troubled the wizards who had the ambition to modify the wizard's pagoda. Now that they had the support of this mature and complete new system, it was no longer wishful thinking to complete similar modifications. What do you mean? The contents of this knowledge crystal can be considered a priceless treasure. How could you be willing to hand it over so easily? Alfred raised his head and looked at Grimm again. This time, his gaze was no longer as cold as before. Instead, it was filled with kindness and curiosity. I know that due to my rashness in the past, I have a grudge and a misunderstanding with you, Lord Castellan. The reason I came here is to resolve the misunderstanding. I hope you're satisfied, City Governor. Grimm explained with a smile on his face. As he spoke, he emphasized the word misunderstanding. Alfred quietly looked at Grimm, and after a long time, he finally smiled. Since it's a misunderstanding, let it go. From now on, Lord Grimm will be an esteemed guest of Molten City. I, Alfred, will welcome you at any time. Grimm let out a sigh of relief in his heart, and the smile on his face became even more pronounced. With this stepping stone, the two of them who had turned enemies into friends once again held hands and began to discuss the future cooperation between the two forces in detail. The Crimson family needed the rare ores under Molten City, and Molten City was also very interested in the giant dragons and battle magical devices that the Crimson family controlled. The two sides hit it off, and the leaders of the two forces immediately reached an intention of strategic cooperation. As for the specifics of the deal, they would leave it to their subordinates to slowly negotiate. After everything was settled, the fire clone that Grimm had projected turned into a ball of scattered flames and slowly dissipated in the secret room. As for the Molten City Master Alfred, he fiddled with the knowledge crystal as he stared at the spot where Grimm had disappeared. His eyes flashed with a complicated light that was difficult for outsiders to understand. It had only been a few years. A little fellow who would tremble in fear when he spoke to him was now on equal footing with him. Moreover, the items that Grimm had casually taken out were enough to amaze a veteran magus like him. This clearly showed how rich Grimm was, and how high the quality was. Hence, even though Grimm had already left, Alfred was still deeply moved. He was completely immersed in a ridiculous space-time disorder. This kid could not be underestimated. Perhaps using this chance to make peace with Grimm was the only way for Molten City to continue developing peacefully. Alfred pondered seriously, and finally made up his mind. It could be said that Grimm was the soul and pillar of the Crimson family. When Grimm left for another world, the entire Crimson family could only choose to lie low and wait for his return. When Grimm returned, the entire Crimson family seemed to have changed. They became active and aggressive, once again expanding their influence. Mary brought a large number of vampire subordinates and headed for the Hyzen Plain. Although the Scattered Tower Forest Association had already developed it for a short period of time, the ruling order and environment were still chaotic. If they wanted to establish a stable ruling structure and continuously develop the resources of the plane, the vampire faction would have to put in a lot of effort. They would have to establish a new outpost, build a teleportation formation, investigate the environment and distribution of resources, try to make contact with the natives of the plane, and intimidate the ambitious slaves. They would also have to establish an effective resource collection system. With so much messy and tedious work, every step had to be carefully calculated and thought over repeatedly. Otherwise, it would lead to extremely serious consequences. However, the vampire subordinates led by Mary were clearly stronger than the Troll Kingdom in the Hyzen Plain. Whether it was through force or carrot and stick, it was only a matter of time before they submitted. Hence, Grimm did not interfere too much with Mary's actions and allowed her to do as she pleased. As for the mountain plain, the gnome cabbie had already sent a team of 300 gnomes there. They were currently conducting a preliminary geological survey and mapping of the terrain. It was estimated that they would be able to obtain a map of the resources of the secondary plain within a month. When that time came, the gnome mining equipment and manpower would be in place, and they would soon enter the development phase. However, although the mountain plain did not have many living beings, there were still many earth elemental creatures that were extremely territorial. It was necessary for the gnome team to be equipped with a certain amount of force. The Hyzen Plain. This was a primordial forest that had yet to be developed. The lush forest covered the earth, and as far as the eye could see, the entire world was covered in lush greenery. In an empty space in the forest, a strange black dot slowly floated in the air. Finally, as the spatial energy continued to vibrate, the spatial singularity slowly expanded and stretched. Finally, it became a 3-meter-wide spatial fissure that kept twisting and deforming. Pu pu pu, then, light and shadow flickered in the space crack, and more than 10 agile and vigorous black and red figures slowly emerged and finally stabilized their existence. Only after they successfully broke free from the shackles of the spatial barrier could they move about freely, and they began their exploration of this strange plane. As a peak grade 3, Mary was naturally the first transmigrator to break free from the shackles of the plane. However, it was also because of this that she suffered the greatest suppression from the laws of the plane. Mary moved her body as she flapped her bat wings, slowly ascending into the forest. However, as far as the eye could see, apart from green, there were no other colors. The trolls were different from humans. Humans liked to cut down trees and open up farmland, creating an enclosed area for living. The trolls, on the other hand, maintained their primitive and simple lifestyle. They wore tree leaves and animal hides, ate wild fruits, and lived in villages or valleys. If one didn't search carefully, it would be difficult to find traces of their activities. It seemed that the first thing he had to do after transmigrating was to spread his eyes and ears and find the areas where the trolls lived. If he wanted to develop the Hyzen plane, he would need a large number of cheap slaves. If they were all transported from the outside world, the cost of transporting them would be enough to devour the few resources of this plane. Thus, to save money, it was more worthwhile to think of ways to capture the natives of this plane. After some simple calculations, Mary turned around and slowly descended to the ground. At this time, the vampires that she had brought with her had also broken free from the shackles of the plane. They were moving their limbs and slowly adapting to the laws of the plane. Wendler, take a few of your men and set up a small camp here. Stabilize this spatial fissure for me and receive the subsequent reinforcement. Yes. Soros, you go there. Winsal, you go there. Leia, you go there. Para, you go there. Within 3 days, try to explore as far as you can. If you find traces of the trolls, immediately report back. Alright, all of you go. Yes. 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 The vampires accepted the order and didn't delay any longer. They each took 1 or 2 subordinates and flew off in the directions that Mary had pointed out. Whether it was the Blood Knights or the Blood Elves, they all had the strength of grade 2 or 3. Although they were suppressed by the plane, their basic strength was still there. With their strength, exploring a secondary plane like this was not too dangerous. With the speed that the vampires usually had, 3 days was enough to cover a distance of 1,000 miles. Chapter 1150. The Mountain Plain. It was a monotonous world with rolling hills and mountains. There was no flat grassland that stretched as far as the eye could see, nor was there a lush green forest, nor was there a slowly flowing stream. The mountain plain was indeed worthy of its name. The entire plain was a strange world made up of pitch-black loose soil and grayish-white sturdy rock. Even the air was filled with a choking smell of dust. There was no water, no clean air, no flora and fauna, and it was impossible to nurture thousands of creatures in the plain. Hence, this was a lonely world, and also a cold world. At the foot of a huge rocky mountain, a small gnome camp was under construction. Hundreds of goblin machines spat out thick steam as they laboriously cleaned and leveled the ground. A dozen goblin engineers stood on a huge rock, pointing at the surroundings as though they were discussing the size of the camp and the distribution of buildings. Dozens of combat magic machines wielding magic ray guns patrolled around the construction site, keeping an eye out for any movement. At the center of the campsite, A strange magical device was supporting an elemental barrier that repelled the dirty air and injected fresh, sweet compressed air into the campsite. A corner of the camp, the airship area. A dozen goblin airships in the shape of cigars were spinning their propellers, struggling to send a goblin engineer and 7 to 8 goblin combat personnel into the sky, and then flew towards a distant place following the terrain. They were temporarily unable to adapt to the air here, so every goblin wore a breathing mask to prevent themselves from becoming a rock after inhaling too much of the air that was filled with earth element. The goblin airship flew slowly in the sky. Engineer Justin Ossick moved a wooden box to the side of the ship and climbed up with difficulty. Ossick moved a wooden crate to the side of the ship and climbed up with difficulty. He raised his old X-ray Type II telescope and scanned the area below him. As a veteran geological surveyor, Justin Ossick did not need to land on the ground. Ossick didn't need to land at all. He could roughly determine the composition of the ore and the ratio of rare ores just by looking at the exposed surface of the rock strata below him. But most of the time, the surface of the rock stratum would be covered by the dust that was everywhere. At such a time, Justin Ossick would order the goblin airship to fly low and use the huge wind generated by the propellers to blow away the dust on the surface of the rocks so that he could observe the composition of the ores. However, this action would undoubtedly bring danger to the goblin airship. After flying more than 100 miles away from the camp and circling around for the 7th time, the gnome warrior standing guard at the bow of the ship screamed in fear. "Attack! Attack! Dodge quickly!" When there was a place that he was interested in, Justin would order the gnome warriors on the airship to shoot a few times at the rock strata, and then use the reflection of the broken rocks to determine the distribution of the ores. Finally, near a valley 317 miles away from the outpost camp, Justin found something special. The airship circled 3 times in the air and scanned the surrounding ground. After finding no traces of the earth elementals and stone elementals, it carefully landed on the ground. With one hand holding the metal rope and the other holding the magic ray gun, the 5 members of the 7th Goblin Party landed heavily on the ground in their magic machine armor. Thud, 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 the thick metal mechanical feet stepped on the ground, leaving 2 deep footprints. The dust on the ground rolled up, and the members of the 7th Goblin Combat Team coughed violently. "Damn it, damn it, damn it! The environment here is really bad." Captain Taz put on his breathing mask with a backhand, and a muffled and distorted voice came from inside. Hurry up and occupy the high ground here. Beta, take the magic cannon to the high ground. Shauna, set up a firing point near the airship. Hanson, you and I protect Lord Justin." "Got it, boss." "Leave it to me, okay." His subordinates answered one after another, and began to rush to their positions. Justin climbed down the airship with difficulty along the rope. He held a pickaxe in one hand and a magic spectrometer distributed by the Geological Survey headquarters in the other. He stood in the shadow of the airship and looked around, and finally pointed in a direction. "Go there." Then, the 3-man team set off without any hesitation. They were on tenterhooks along the way. These little goblins were only about half a meter tall, and in front of the stone elementals that were 3 to 5 meters tall, they were like little beans. There was no need to fight. Most of the goblins would die with just a stomp of the stone elementals' huge feet. Hence, the 2 goblins who were in charge of protecting the geological surveyor, one at the front and the other at the back, moved slowly and laboriously on the uneven ground with their magic armor that was less than 2 meters long. One of them was in front while the other was behind. The geological surveyor, Justin, seemed to have forgotten about the danger. From time to time, he would crack open a rock with his pickaxe, and use the spectrometer to quickly scan and analyze it. Most of the time, when he discovered some strange place, he would pounce over while cheering, and then knock non-stop, completely forgetting that this was a strange and dangerous world. Faced with such a guide who forgot everything after work, The two goblin bodyguards could only do their best to follow behind him, the magic ray guns in their hands always pointed at the more dangerous places in the surroundings. Chapter 1151. The Exhilarating Camp in the Outer Region. Just like before, this place was still filled with streams of people, and it was extremely bustling. However, this was the outer region after all. Even an inconspicuous person setting up a stall on the street was at least a level 2 wizard. People like them, who had come out to train as mere level 2 wizards, did not even dare to step out of the Exhilarating camp. It was simply too dangerous. The environment here was not the only dangerous thing. What was even more terrifying were the strange alien races that came from all directions. No one knew what kind of strange abilities they had, and no one knew if they were here to make a deal or to hunt. Thus, once they stepped out of the camp and lost the protection of the wizard's pagoda, the weakness of human wizards was obvious. Grim wore a black traveler's robe that covered his entire body. He hurriedly walked out of the wizard's pagoda and raised his head to get his bearings. He did not walk toward the center of the market, but instead turned and walked toward the edge of the camp. Along the way, he passed by many lively areas and saw many strange creatures from other worlds. Some of them were star ocean wanderers, while others came from the secondary dimensions ruled by the wizards. In their own territories, they might be kings who ruled over tens of thousands of territories, or powerful fighters who were respected by the people. But here they were the most ordinary members of the noisy crowd. Many times they were even associated with the word weak for the first time. This was the camp of the wizards, and naturally, the status of the wizards was the highest. Under normal circumstances, no outsider would dare to have a conflict with the wizards in the camp. Thus, even though Grim had concealed his identity, the faint energy aura that leaked out was enough for the people to not dare stop him. After passing through the market and the peripheral world, Grim soon arrived in front of the witchcraft barrier that covered the sky and the earth. Behind the barrier were two different worlds. Inside, there were birds chirping, flowers fragrant, and plants fragrant, while outside, there were raging winds and one energy whirlpool after another. Inside, there was lush green grass, while outside there was a dark, barren, and strange steel rock. The rock here could withstand the erosion of energy hurricanes for thousands of years without collapsing. It was definitely the best material to build a wizard tower. Grim did not hesitate at all. He raised a dark red energy shield and walked out of the witchcraft barrier. Just as he stepped out of the wizard barrier, the energy shield outside his body crackled and splashed out dazzling sparks. Grim wasn't surprised by such a strange scene. He pulled up his hood and flew off the ground, propelled by a scarlet flame stream towards a distant place. For the sake of secrecy, Grim didn't even use the short-distance teleportation formation in the camp when he left. Instead, he spent 4 days walking the distance of over 1,500 kilometers. Only then did they arrive at the edge of the boulder where Exhilarating's camp was located. Here, light and order began to retreat, replaced by chaotic energy storms and void turbulence that was everywhere. Grim paused for a moment at the edge of the boulder. After getting his bearings, he once again flew towards the endless darkness with the help of the crimson flames. After transforming his bloodline into an astral beast, this terrifying region filled with violent void energy was no longer dangerous for him. Instead, it made him feel relaxed, as if he had returned home. He deactivated the energy shield and allowed the violent energy of the void to blow against his body without any obstructions. His chaotic body condensed into tiny energy vortexes around him, absorbing the turbulent energy that blew over. Some of the energy was absorbed into his body to supply Grim's elemental energy, while the rest was dispersed to counteract the violent void energy. When others entered the astral sea, not only could they not absorb void energy, their own strength would also be constantly consumed. However, with Grim's chaotic physique, absorbing this gentle void energy was as easy as breathing. As long as he didn't cast any large-scale spells, Grimm's strength would not be consumed. Instead, it would slowly increase. As he flew quickly in the empty darkness, he could occasionally see the figures of boulders floating quietly in the dark void in the distance. Some of the boulders were only 100 meters wide, while others were as majestic as mountains. One could not help but wonder if some powerful being had used extraordinary power to move mountains out of some plain. However, these boulders of various sizes floated alone in the endless darkness, silently waiting for the end of their lives. Finally, Grimm stopped in front of a particularly large boulder. This was a floating boulder that occupied an area of 100 kilometers, floating in the void like an upside-down pyramid. The exposed boulder below had been eroded by the void hurricane into densely packed holes that looked like a beehive. The exposed rock walls were covered in specks of strange light. It was obvious that this was an ore rich in metal. It was also because of these metal ore particles that the boulder could resist the void energy's corrosion day and night. Otherwise, it would have shattered into thousands of rock fragments and been devoured by this strange space, leaving not a single drop behind. This boulder obviously met Grimm's requirements in every aspect. Therefore, after the explosion, Grimm appeared on the slightly flat surface of the giant rock in the next moment. It also protected the weak spell lines and mana nodes within the teleportation spell formation. The surging spatial energy began to converge above the spell formation, condensing into a black spatial singularity the size of a fist. As the spatial energy continued to converge, the singularity began to collapse inward, turning into a small black hole, which then tore into a spatial crack that was 10 meters long and 1 meter wide. The spatial crack was like an ugly centipede, twisting and turning above the spell formation. Grimm spent a great deal of effort to stabilize it in place, and it continued to grow bigger and bigger. While Grimm stabilized the spatial crack above the spell formation, the elemental equipment was also busy at the bottom. The operation of the teleportation spell formation required a large amount of magic energy, so the magic crystals placed in the magic nodes could not last for more than a quarter of an hour, and a new batch had to be replaced. And this laborious task undoubtedly fell on the shoulders of the elemental magic machines. For such a large spell formation to operate, the amount of magic crystals consumed at every moment was abnormally shocking. At the very least, ordinary magi could not afford such a huge consumption of magic crystals. When the spatial crack above the teleportation spell formation was wide enough and long enough, Grimm used some special spiritual connection to send a strange signal into the distance. Not long after, the space fissure suddenly trembled and shook violently. The mirror-like light membrane began to bulge outwards, as if an abnormally large body was trying to squeeze through the spatial crack. The light membrane grew taller, and finally, with an explosive sound, the spatial barrier was torn apart. Chapter 1152. Gaz Lervy squeezed out of the spatial rift with all his might. What followed closely behind was an endless stream of magical mechanical bodies that seemed to be endless and never-ending. As soon as these magical alloys drilled out of the spatial rift, under Gaz Lervy's control, they quickly flowed to the camp area that Grimm had chosen and assembled into strange metal buildings. The magical alloys continued to pour out, part of it converged into the main body of the building and began to rise from the ground in the distance, forming tall factories and workshops, while the other part drilled into the ground and began to dig deep under the camp, continuously advancing towards the core of the giant rock. In less than half an hour, a terrifying city made of steel had formed in front of Grimm. Grimm looked at the alien brain floating in front of him, and could not help but sigh. Every time I see you casually shaping and modifying these enchanted alloys like clay figurines, I can't help but be amazed at the wonders and mysteries of the multiverse. If you're given endless energy and inexhaustible magical alloys, in my opinion, you'll definitely be the one to rule the multiverse in the end. The alien brain, which looked like a small mountain of flesh, trembled slightly as it conversed with Grimm through telepathy. Rule the multiverse? Only those naive fellows who have never stepped out of the plane would have such thoughts. When they witness the might of the Titans and the terror of the Lords of Calamity, I'm afraid they'll feel ashamed of their simple-mindedness. Tell me, why did you suddenly become so brave? Grimm smiled. I thought you'd only send the cloned brain, Sock, to deal with it. I didn't expect it to be your main body. I'm just learning from you. Learning from me? Yes. When we first met, my lord was only a rank 1 magus. At this point, the alien brain paused for a moment, seeming to sigh. However, it quickly adjusted itself. When I joined the Lord's faction, you were already a grade 2 wizard. As for me, I was a grade 3 magus. It was this difference in strength that gave me a chance to escape from your control. But although I have seized many opportunities, the progress of your strength has far exceeded my expectations. When you reached grade 3, although I wasn't convinced, I still had hope in my heart. However, I heard some time ago that you have become a Tier 4 sorcerer. At that time, I realized for the first time that I might never be able to escape from your control, and the cause of all this was my conservatism and cowardice. So many opportunities have been placed in front of me, but as long as there is the slightest possibility of threatening my main body, I will instinctively choose to retreat and give up. It is my personality that has caused me to have no way out now, so I plan to take a risk and chase after your footsteps. At least I won't let you leave me too far behind. They were then sent to the ore sorting center, where the metal-rich ore particles would be filtered out and sent to the smelting workshop, while the useless ore residue would be compressed into huge rock bricks to be used in the construction of the steel capital's outer buildings. In just half an hour, the first batch of alien metals had been compressed into metal ingots, which were sent to the metal storehouses on a conveyor belt. Grimm had also obtained a list of metals from the alien brain. It had to be said that there was no trash among the ores found in the outer realms. It was just a barren rock that no one paid attention to, but it had already found 37 types of rare metals and 164 types of magic alloys. All of them had some unknown magical properties. Actually, this was also conceivable. After all, the damaged planes had been swept into the void storm, and ordinary planar matter would have long been eroded by the violent and ferocious energy tides. Only the essence of these planes could withstand the ravages of the energy storm, and coincidentally be swept into the eye of the storm that was as calm as before. Moreover, they had been immersed in the eye of the storm for such a long time. Even if it was just a piece of ordinary steel, after being soaked in the energy for so long, it would probably mutate into some strange magic alloy that was hard to find in the outside world. Using such rare metals to create ordinary magical machine warriors was a little too extravagant. Hence, the newly refined metals were stored in the warehouse. The alien brain moved the ordinary magic alloys it had brought from the Eternal Capital onto the assembly line, and began to forge batch after batch of metal magic machines. The first batch that walked down the assembly line were 300 engineering magic machines. They were also the tentacles and engineers that the alien brain used to control the steel capital. With their addition, the steel capital's vitality was fully unleashed. All the workshops, smelting rooms, conveyor belts, and processing plants began to operate at full capacity. The loud rumble of metal echoed across the land. After all, this was the territory of human sorcerers. 5 hours after the steel capital rose from the ground, a standard team of sorcerers appeared in the darkness near the giant rock. Their bodies were covered in colorful energy shields that flickered in the gentle tide of energy. The leader of the team, a grade 4 sorcerer, pulled down his hood and frowned as he looked at everything happening on the giant rock. He could not help but take out a sorcery crystal from his pocket and silently communicated with the headquarters. "Sir, is it a foreign race?" A grade 3 white-robed woman behind him asked in a low voice. She had a small, jade-white staff on her waist, and there were sparkling and beautiful ice crystals on it. It looks like it. The grade 4 sorcerer frowned. I think I've heard of these metal lifeforms in some places. They seem to feed on metal and wander the depths of the galaxy in search of metal veins. It doesn't matter if it's a metallic life form or not. It's already trespassed into our Magi's territory. Just chase it away. Another boorish man who seemed to be a rank 3 refinement magus shouted without a care in the world. The 5 grade 2 sorcerers behind the team looked at the shocking scene in front of them, not daring to participate in the conversation between the high-grade sorcerers. While they were still discussing, the red light above the giant rock collapsed, and a hazy figure appeared not far in front of them. The members of the team immediately prepared for battle. The grade 4 sorcerer's body also flickered, and in an instant, he was covered in 7 different energy shields. However, when they saw the strange man who appeared from the flames and the golden wooden sign in his hand, they relaxed a little. The Tier 4 sorcerer in the lead was a man with a tanned face that was long and thin, giving him an unprepossessing appearance. He looked at the golden wooden sign in Grimm's hand and took out a magic wand from his pocket. He waved it in front of the wooden sign, and the image of a burning iron fist and a long string of golden runes were immediately projected on the wooden sign. Grimm, grade 4 fire sorcerer, elder of the Scattered Tower Forest Association, leader of the Crimson family, the male sorcerer muttered the golden runes. As he read, he looked at Grimm with a strange expression. "So you're Wizard Grimm." Chapter 1153. Is there a problem? Seeing the strange expressions on the other party's faces, even Grimm was at a loss. No. It's nothing. The male magus hurriedly hid his gaff with an awkward smile, changing the topic. We're from Camp Isorda's 53rd Squad, responsible for patrolling this area. May I know what you're doing here, sir? Grimm smiled faintly. Establishing a base. Establishing a base. My family wishes to participate in the foreign trade, so we need to establish a suitable base here. Is there some special rule in the camp that forbids us from doing so? The male magus's expression stiffened, and he said hesitantly, "There isn't. However, most magus families who have just entered the foreign lands will find a way to establish their base within the Isorda camp. For someone like you, establishing a residence outside the camp, I don't think it's that safe, is it?" As the male magus spoke, the Tier 3 female magus behind the male magus suddenly cried out in surprise, and whispered, "Sir, look." The male magus was slightly taken aback, and he looked down. Only then did he realize that the Steel City had undergone some strange changes in a short period of time. Metal fortresses had risen outside the Steel City, and cannons lined the sides of the fortresses. The blue cannons glinted with a cold glint under the dusky sky. Groups of tall metal magical machines marched out of the metal hall in an orderly fashion and began to station themselves in the fortresses. With the fixed magic cannons and mobile magical machines, the entire Steel City was like a fully armed hedgehog, displaying a frightening defense. Seeing this scene, the male magus could not help but nod inwardly. "It seems that you're very confident in establishing your family's base here, sir. According to the rules of the Isorda camp, any magus family that wishes to establish a base here has to submit an application to Lord Kaelf, and it can only be implemented with his approval. However, considering that you've established your family's base outside the camp, you're no longer restricted by the camp's rules. When we return, I'll help you make a report." Grimm was naturally overjoyed to see how cooperative the other party was. The two of them hovered in the air, and conversed for a while longer before waving goodbye and going their separate ways. The patrol team returned to the camp and reported the situation. Naturally, it caused quite a commotion. But Grimm completely ignored them and stayed in Steel City to improve its defenses. At this point, although Grimm had made rapid progress, the number of enemies he had offended was not small. If those fellows knew that Grimm had established a foundation in the outer realm, they would definitely rush here to cause trouble. Therefore, before Grimm considered victory, He asked the alien brain to build this fortress to be extremely sturdy. The wind blew the sails, and Alice seized the opportunity to add a few more words. Big Sister Circe, don't forget, in the last witch meeting, you promised me that you would never attack Grimm again. Then what about Shuni's death? Why are you so sure that Shuni was killed by Grimm? Unless you did something behind her back? Circe's whole body began to tremble. This wasn't because he was afraid, but because he was furious to the extreme. The reason why Shuni participated in the Arcane Kingdom's mission was that she had personally arranged it. That also meant that she had personally sent a helper who was on good terms with her to death. Moreover, the death of Shuni was a small matter, but the loss of the Shadow Pearl was a big deal. But the inside story was related to the face of the Dark Witches and the many behind-the-scenes deals. How could she cry in front of the other leaders? Alice, don't forget that you're also a northern witch. Aren't you afraid of others talking about you when you speak up for a wizard? Circe finally gritted her teeth and suppressed her anger. She squeezed out a gloomy sentence from her teeth. If he was just an outsider, I naturally wouldn't help him. But Big Sister Circe, the one you want to deal with now is Alice's husband. At this point, Alice's face was also red, and she looked very shy. Alice was happy, but the other witch leaders were shocked at the same time. Alice, there are some things you can't say. Husband or not. What nonsense are you talking about? The leader of the Death Witches, Thuna, glared, and a tyrannical aura of death instantly filled the entire council hall. Big Sister Thuna, I'm not talking nonsense. I've decided to become husband and wife with Grimm, and a formal ceremony will be held in the near future. I hope I can get your blessing at that time. Alice put away her smile and said solemnly. Dead silence. Silence. The entire council hall was silent in an instant. All the witches couldn't help but frown deeply, and their faces became unhappy. Alice, think about it again. According to the tradition of our northern witches, there has never been a precedent of a high-grade witch, especially a witch leader, marrying those wizards. The leader of the Death Witches, Thuna, warned sternly. Sister, do you mean that the Witch Council will never allow such a thing to happen? It's not so absolute, and the Witch Council has no clear rules to restrain it. However, generally speaking, in order to maintain the independence and purity of the Northern Witches, it's also a tacit rule not to marry the wizards of other organizations. The independence of the Northern Witches? Alice smiled coldly. The factions of the Northern Witches don't attack each other, and don't harm each other's interests. This should be a tacit rule in everyone's hearts. Yes. Then I'd like to ask, of the 13 witch factions that have been passed down since ancient times, how many of them are left? Chapter 1154. Alice, is your accusation very serious? Suna glared at her with a gloomy expression. You are accusing leader Circe of interfering in the affairs of the Fate Witches. Do you insist on this point of view, or are you willing to withdraw your statement? Alice smiled bitterly, her gentle and beautiful face filled with sorrow. What is there to avoid? Can't you sisters see how the Dark Witches usually bully us? Or is it that the so-called unity of the witches in your hearts means that the weak have to swallow their anger? The battle between me and Medusa, no matter who wins or loses, is an internal matter of the Fate Witches. But ask yourselves, how many of you here have not participated in it, and have not suppressed me, Alice, either openly or secretly? This is the independence of the witches and the neutrality you keep saying? Listening to Alice's harsh accusation, although the faces of the witches' leaders were all unhappy, no one stood up to refute her. None of them were blind or deaf. Everyone was well aware of everything that was done in secret, but they still maintained their unity on the surface. At this moment, Alice used this witches' conference to expose everything. Everyone's faces were very ugly, but they could not refute her. Every witches' faction has its ups and downs, and no one can guarantee that their own faction will prosper forever. Our fate witches, because great witch Medusa continuously stole the sorcerer world's power of fate, suffered the backlash of the plane's consciousness, and thus the inheritance was severed. And in this time's battle of fate, due to the rebound of the plane's consciousness, I unexpectedly won the position of the leader of the fate witches. Next, it is naturally the battle between me, Alice, and that great witch Medusa, and it has nothing to do with you. But during this period of time when I was recovering, I suffered the fierce suppression of my witches. Your reasons may be very good, but ask yourselves, if one day in the future your faction is also attacked and suppressed by your peers when it has just been reborn, how would you feel? Our fate witches are not good at fighting, and we need the help of our sisters to develop smoothly. But now, my sisters have become the accomplices of my enemy. What else can I do other than looking for help from the outside? Among the remaining witch factions, the Deceit Witch, the Hypocrisy Witch, and the Winter Witch had more or less intervened in the struggle for the fate of the two Destiny Witch leaders. So when they heard Alice's question, they were a little embarrassed. However, the leader of the Dark Witches, Circe, who was the most involved among them and could be said to have been the one to go into battle, had an ashen expression on her face. If it weren't for the Witch Council, she would have already taken Alice down. Thuna, who was originally full of anger, suddenly let out a long sigh and finally spoke again. But, hearing Circe finally admit defeat, Alice's face finally showed a trace of a smile. The shadow orb is a grade 5 treasure, and it's not something that can be easily found. So, I understand. You will definitely have to pay a price to get back the shadow orb. Just state your conditions. What I need is... Alice smiled faintly, and her voice could not help but gradually become deeper. The whispers of the two women could be heard in the meeting hall. The blazing flame monarch, Grim and Alice, who had come from afar, hid in a secret room and began whispering to each other. After briefly recounting everything that had happened in the Witch Council, Alice grabbed Grim's right hand and stared into his eyes. I agreed to Circe's request without your consent. You won't blame me, right? Grim laughed and pulled Alice into his arms. His thick lips stopped her from saying anything else. After a long time, Grim let go of Alice with satisfaction and said with a smile, "This is your punishment for saying the wrong thing again." Alice's face was flushed red, and she pressed her forehead against his shoulder, gently biting his chest. Grim raised his head, his determined face full of emotion. "Alice, I can pat my chest and say that in this world, the only two people I trust are you and Mary. As long as you two don't fight, I have nothing to fear. I asked you about the shadow orb. Why are you bringing this up? Is this a warning?" Alice's sly eyes flashed, as if saying, "I don't understand." "Haha, ever since I got the shadow orb, I knew that I couldn't keep it for long. After all, it is the Dark Witch's original magic tool, and the other side will risk their lives to get it back. So it's not surprising that this happened. Besides, with a shrewd housekeeper like you helping me calculate in the background, the price that the other party will pay won't be small. You know what to do." Alice immediately smiled after receiving Grim's praise. "However, I can give up everything else, but that Circe must give you something that can replenish your life force. Otherwise, I will never make a deal with her." Grim put his arm around Alice's body and pulled her up. He looked at her deeply, nose to nose and eyes to eyes. You know everything?" Alice stammered. "What kind of fate blessing did you cast on me? How could it devour almost 80% of your life force?" Grim asked. "It's not as much as you said." Alice did not dare to look at Grim directly. "It's only 70%. Alice, I hope you understand. We are not just using each other, we have real feelings for each other. I'm used to having you and Mary by my side. You are my family, my lovers, and I don't want any of you to be in danger. Do you hear me?" Hearing Grim's heartfelt words, the shyness on Alice's face gradually disappeared. She looked at Grim, her eyes full of love. "I heard it and I felt it. I won't do such a stupid thing again.